Pete Maverick Mitchell. Your reputation precedes you.
Thank you, sir.
Wasn't a compliment.
Ahoy, everyone! My name is Bobby Shortle, and I'm here with Nick Rocco Scalia, and we are the Intrepid Filmographers. Every mini-series, we chart a course through the full filmography of an under-discussed genre or journeyman filmmaker. In this expedition, we do our best to try and be explorers, using our years of film knowledge to help guide us, but always being open to discovering new things about the medium we love so much. We are currently embedded in the films of Joseph Kosinski, and today we take to the skies for his fourth film, Top Gun: Maverick, and figure out once and for all, who is the better pilot? Nick, how you doing tonight, my friend?
I'm doing really good. I feel like it's all been kind of leading up to this to some extent. We've been talking about Joseph Kosinski. We've covered a number of films up to this point, but this was the one. This was the one we just were looking forward to. Couldn't wait to talk about. I couldn't wait to see it again. I'm ready to head into the danger zone. Go Mach 10. Mach 10.3.
10.3, and then your plane will blow up.
Yeah.
And then people on the internet will have some weird theory that Maverick was dead the entire time and that the whole rest of the movie was a dream.
Is that a thing?
That's an internet theory. I mean, Kosinski obviously has been like, that's not the case. That's insane.
I did not know that at all.
But
that makes me want to rewatch the whole thing now.
But we were talking last week, when we were doing Only the Brave, which is a movie everybody has seen and remembers and talks about. And we like to gather information. We like to have context. We like to know a little bit about the making of the movie, because since we're talking about this guy Kosinski as a director and an artist, it's important to know more than just what we're seeing on screen, right? And for Only the Brave, it was very difficult to find anything. Like we put together like this little dossier for us to kind of pull facts and stuff, and we don't read the whole thing, but I read the whole thing before we record. We don't read the whole thing on air, but I also like to track down interviews. I like to watch interviews with Kosinski, because that's a lot of times where you get a lot of like the cool little facts, right? Is from interviews when he's just kind of talking off the cuff and somebody asks him an interesting question. And for Only the Brave, there was nothing. There was like no interviews he did about Only the Brave except for like the EPK interviews. And for Top Gun Maverick, when I searched on YouTube, it was like, oh, here are 17,000 results of Joseph Kosinski talking about Top Gun. So I had to like really pick and choose, what I wanted to do. I did want to ask you, just starting out, just kind of orient us in this kind of world, right? What is your relationship to the original Top Gun?
I'm glad you asked, because I was going to ask you the same thing.
Okay.
I would say I saw it probably in the early 90s when I was a kid, and I wouldn't say it was ever like one of my top 10 or top 20 favorite movies of all time, but I always really had an affinity for it. Like, it is, for a growing boy, a growing American boy at the end of the Cold War or whatever, like there's something about that movie. There's a real energy to it. There's just like this magical thing that it does that you don't see in other, because like it was ripped off so many times, right? Like I love aviation stuff. I kind of grew up around that a little bit. My grandfather was an Air Force veteran, and he was a pilot. And my dad and I would go to air shows all the time. And like, I knew like when they came out with a new plane and they were going to unveil it, like, as I was into movies, and then also when they premiere like a new fighter jet or something like that, that was the same kind of thing for me. So this was definitely a movie that was in my wheelhouse. And I've always really, probably because of Top Gun, I love aerial combat in movies. I think we might have talked about that on the show before. Maybe we were off air, but
no, Oblivion. Like I think it was the first time. I think it was Tron. You talked about it.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yes. So there's the dogfight sequence in Tron, and I love that stuff. I was talking about Dunkirk, I think, which is, until I saw this, the best I had seen in a while. So yeah, I definitely grew up with that film. I watched it a lot as a kid, and I always like something about that Tony Scott sort of style too, because the other thing that like, along with movies and, the other stuff I was into, I watched a shit ton of MTV as a young boy, much to the chagrin of my parents. So the music video sort of style that he came up out of and, kind of worked extensively in that mode. I just like stuff like that. And, you got Danger Zone playing, and there's F-14s taking off the carrier. And there's an energy to that I always really, really liked. And it kind of matched up with other stuff that I was into. I played both of the NES games like religiously. which were not terrific games, but they were a reasonable sort of adaptation of the movie. You did have to land the plane on a carrier. It did have the cockpit view, which I just thought was the most awesome thing. So yeah, I mean, again, I never considered this like one of my favorite movies, but I did always really like it. The last time I saw the original Top Gun, it was a couple of years ago, a couple of years before Maverick came out. And one of my wife's friends, coworkers, I think, bought it for her on DVD because she had just said she'd never seen it before. And I don't even remember who this was, but they were like, "Oh, you're gonna love this. It's full of like sexy shirtless dudes and all that machismo and all that stuff." And we watched it together. I was like, "Oh, cool. You got Top Gun on DVD. We're going to watch that together." And I was way more into it than she was. And then we got to the end of it. She's like, "Yeah, that was all right. I don't really see what all the fuss was about." And I was just like, "Oh, no." But I really enjoyed that viewing of it. And I felt like it held up really well. I mean, it's starting to show its age in terms of some of the things that it's trying to do. And it was always a propagandistic kind of movie and real just jingoistic gung ho. The U.S. military is great. The military industrial complex is great kind of movie. But also, and actually Kosinski said this too, I think it was him that used this exact sort of quote. But I always kind of looked at Top Gun more as a sports movie than a war movie, because, the enemy is really not that important. And that certainly gets carried over into Maverick. And, because I liked war movies a lot growing up too, and the sort of experience of World War II and Vietnam and, what previous generations had gone through. And I never really kind of saw this as in that realm. You know what I mean? Like this was always...
No, it's not a war movie. It's not a war.
It's a competition movie.
Yeah, for sure.
It's being the best of the best. It's having the need for speed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, and that's what I think I really liked about it.
Yeah. So when I was a kid, I watched this movie a lot, Top Gun a lot, and I mostly just for the airplane stuff, like you said. Like I became obsessed with airplanes at a certain point. Like I was like, like with all the fight.
Oh, you were one of those nerds too?
Yeah, all the different fighters, and I was like, My dad got me like a calendar that had like each month had a different like, Air Force or Navy, plane in it. So I was like all into it. And my dad worked for McDonnell Douglas, which was like a big airplane manufacturer. So, he would bring home stuff where like, oh, this is like, because they made some of those planes. And I was really into that, right? The movie itself, like I liked the dogfighting stuff. Obviously I was like probably like 8 or 9 when I first saw it. So I didn't care about any of the romance stuff or anything, which is like honestly a huge part of the movie. It's so much. I rewatched the movie this week because I hadn't seen it in so long. I was like, my memory of this is so like flinty at this point. It's like just these like kind of big iconic looking moments. And that's all I have in my head, right? Is these things. So I wanted to watch because I wanted to be able to talk about like the differences sort of like in the style of the movie, we will talk about that. But I don't know if people understand how big of a hit it was though at the time. Because people are like, oh, Top Gun Maverick made $700 and something million here, which is crazy. Adjusted for inflation, the original Top Gun would have made $514 million. It made $180 million domestically in, 1986. So it was a huge hit. It was ubiquitous. And the funny thing is,
like I think you and I are both too young to have been a part of that initial excitement for it. But like I have read that this drove military recruitment. Like there was kind of an up to that point not really seen interest in these kind of things, and breaking out the F-14s and just kind of showcasing the military hardware. And that was kind of a win-win for the studio and again the
for sure. And of course, there's a whole set of let's say moralistic conundrums you can get into when you think about that as an aspect of both of these movies in many ways. And we're not going to not ignore that, but we also need to talk about the movie as a movie, and no art exists in a vacuum. So it is a factor in this, obviously, but it's not going to be the main factor. But a couple things I took away from watching the two movies in conjunction with each other, which is I did not realize until watching the 1986 movie again, that Teller is kind of doing an impression of Anthony Edwards in the movie. Not a full impression, but like the mannerisms, the way he moves his body, even the way he talks a little bit, like is full on Anthony Edwards from that movie. And I was kind of taken aback by it because it had been so long since I'd watched that movie, how closely they were. That's
interesting. I mean, he is playing the character's son, and
yeah,
you do tend to like take on some of those things from your father as, mannerisms, ways of speaking, ways of playing Great Balls of Fire on the piano.
Yes. Of course, a thing that was an old song in 1986 is now like an ancient song that I don't even believe those people would know anymore. But
see, I actually like that move. We'll talk about that scene.
No. I don't say I don't like it. I'm saying looking at it from like this like kind of shitty realistic like to be kind of cynical perspective. But going back before we get to where we have a lot to get through before we get to that point. I was struck by that, but in a more serious tone, I want to talk about this when we get into it. The difference in it doesn't even feel like Pete Mitchell in the two movies are the same character, like at all. Not like the same person. I mean, which I don't think is a problem for Top Gun Maverick, but I'm just saying like it's an interesting discussion, and it's so crazy because I think if you would just watch Top Gun Maverick, you'd be like, okay, this looks like Top Gun, right? But when you watch Top Gun, nobody makes movies look like Tony Scott movies,
Sure.
And even then, this is a very early Tony Scott movie. It has like this like saturation and like that and of course we're not shooting on film anymore, but there's like film grain and just like this style to it that's completely different. And I think it's fascinating. I think it's a testament to Kosinski and bringing his own sort of stamp to it that he wasn't aping a style of a very influential film and filmmaker, for that. So those are the things I kind of noticed between that. But now that we talked about our sort of thoughts on the original movie, where did you see Top Gun Maverick? Did you see it in the theater when it was out?
100%.
Okay.
Yes,
all
absolutely. Right. I mean, I remember seeing the trailers for this a couple years before. It was like, we'll talk about the troubled production and release history of this movie. I mean, it's amazing that it was the success that it was because it just went through a lot to get there. It's a movie about persistence and perseverance and plowing forward against all odds. And it actually kind of did that. But I remember it was about 2019 or whatever, and they're just showing trailers for this. And Tom Cruise is out doing interviews about how all these actors are going through flight training and we're using all real hardware and we're going to do as much practical effects as possible. And even at the time, right? Like before theaters shut down for all that time, I was like, I can't wait to see this on the biggest screen I possibly can. They made a huge deal about shooting it in IMAX and getting the cameras actually on the aircraft and really just getting up close and personal with all these things. And again, always was a Top Gun fan since I was probably, as you said, 7 or 8 years old. So I was pumped for it then. And then just waiting literal years to actually see it come to fruition and actually be on the big screen. And you must have done the same thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, by the time Top Gun Maverick was announced, I was kind of in this zone where I was kind of getting a little bit tired of like the legacy sequel thing a little bit. So I was a little...
Oh, me too, but it was Top Gun, so I was like, I'll let this one go.
And
this isn't Ghostbusters. This is Top Gun.
And even with my like obsession with Top Gun when I was a little kid, in the years intervening from it, I had kind of been like, yeah, but that movie is like sort of, like you said, jingoistic and cheeseball, and I'm like, I'm not really in a place where that's what I want to be seeing right now. When the movie is announced.
Well, I'm certainly much more of a pacifist than I was when I was 9 years old.
But watching the trailer, and then when the trailer came out, I was like, oh, this actually looks good, right? And then I remember it started getting all this buzz, but it was funny because it did the thing where it opened good, but not amazing, and then just kept going, right? It was one of those movies that just kept making a lot of money every single week, which is how it got to the point where it was. And I remember being like, hey, I'm like in the mood to see this. And two of my friends were like, oh, do you want to go see the stupid Jurassic Park movie, Jurassic World movie? And I was like, the only way you're getting me to the movie theater to see this Jurassic World movie is if before it we see Top Gun Maverick. And they were like, Top Gun, I don't really care about Top Gun. My one buddy's like, I've never even seen the first Top Gun. I was like, it doesn't matter. All I've heard is this movie is like, you have to see it in the movie theater. It's like fantastic. And we went to see it. And it was like one of those, wonderful, amazing theater experiences. Because the entire audience is in it for every moment, right? It's like they're cheering when they're supposed to cheer. They're gasping when they're supposed to gasp. They're like silent when they're supposed to be silent. Everybody is fully in. And you don't get that, all the time when you're seeing even a big movie that a lot of people like. So it was an amazing theater experience. And
I was going to say, like, I consider this one of my, like, maybe top 10, top 5, even theatrical experiences of all time. And I do think just theaters having gone dark during COVID for as long as they did, like I was kind of waiting for something like this. And this was not the first movie I went to, like I think it was Halloween Kills or something like that. So a slightly lesser film than this one, another sort of legacy sequel that probably shouldn't have been made. But no, I think I went opening week. I did see it on not IMAX, but XD, which is basically the same thing with the 11.1 sound, all that. Went with my dad, who I, watched this movie with when I was a kid and was a big part of, all those films. He watched all those mostly terrible aviation movies with me. Flight of the Intruder. Shout out to Flight of the Intruder and other lesser known 90s flight combat movies. But yeah, I mean, it was exactly the same thing. But I think also just because we were waiting for something like this sort of big screen, spectacular movie that was just like, and Tom Cruise comes out, he's recorded, of course, but he does that a couple of minutes before the movie. Were they still doing that? Like when you went to see it? So it's like, thank you for being here. I really wanted this to be a big screen movie. And like, I mean, we've talked a little bit on the show before about Tom Cruise. He felt very sincere in that moment. Like that might have been his most believable couple of minutes of screen time in his entire career, where he was just saying it meant so much to me to have this on the big screen and have people come back into the theater and see this movie. And I think just that got me fired up. It was a great start for what this film, and it delivered on it. I felt like it really paid off. Just that whole idea, the very long wait for this movie, the very long wait to go back to theaters. The very long wait since the original, which was quite a long time before this. And yeah, I mean, and so watching it for the show, I'd only seen it the once because I figured this was such a big screen movie. I was like, I'm going to try watching this on a very small screen. So I didn't end up following through. I watched about half of it on my laptop, and I will say flat out, it holds up on a smaller screen. It doesn't necessarily work better that way. Like you do want to see this on as big of a screen with as good of a sound system as you could possibly get. But I don't know. I did not think it was like, I was afraid I was going to see it on a smaller screen and be like, oh, this is actually crap. And I was completely wrong. And I was just swayed by the experience of it and just the fact that I was back in a movie theater seeing this kind of movie that way again. But I don't think, I mean, that certainly helped. And that's why, like I said, I put it up there with some of my best theatrical experiences ever. But I think it still pretty much works.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great theater experience, and I think it's not to be discounted. I mean, these, it's a huge movie meant to be seen on a big screen, and it's engineered to, be watched by a whole group of people in one room reacting and sort of feeding off each other. And I think that, that is a style of movie making that I think sometimes people can poo-poo a little bit. Not this movie was poo-pooed, obviously. It was roundly praised and was nominated for Best Picture. But, that can be something that I think is discounted a little bit. And I think it's incredibly important. And obviously it's been seems to have been Cruise's only mission as an actor for the last, 10 years is to make movies like this, right? And we'll get to the point where we're at a movie where I kind of have a take about this movie. And I think it's a take about most modern Tom Cruise movies, which is I think that they are sort of metatextually about Tom Cruise movie stardom. Like you look at this movie and it's about this guy who is the best kind of at what he does, but he's been doing it for so long and everyone is kind of like, why are you still doing this? You should have moved on. You should be doing something else at this point. You're too old, you're not the kind of like pilot that we want anymore. Scratch out pilot and put in movie star. The young, he even says it, like the young guys don't want to be the kind of pilot that I am, and the military doesn't even want the kind of pilot I am anymore. So
yeah, they don't want what I have to give them.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, and even the point where, there's that moment where he sort of, is like picking the team, and he kind of, to Glenn Powell, is like, you kind of got movie star energy, so you're going to stay behind. Tom Cruise don't need movie star energy. I need character actor energy coming with me on this trip.
I need Miles Teller
on this trip. It's also in, I think, some of the casting decisions, right? Where you got people who are like basically contemporaries of Tom Cruise or even younger than Tom Cruise, who are now like out of the action and are playing like the like the boss role, you know.
You're talking about John Hamm.
Talking about John Hamm, and when John Hamm gets a chance to step up to make the plan, he can't make the plan though. He makes a worse plan because he can't do what Tom Cruise does. Can't fly the plane. He can stand in the room and look cool and, you know, be a good heavy, but he can't fly the plane. He can't make the plan that Tom Cruise does. He can't pull off the shit. You know, point at the end where when Teller is in the plane with him. And he's like, what the hell are you doing? You know, like, it's almost like I didn't sign up for the Tom Cruise shit. Like, I can do Miles Teller shit, but I can't do Tom Cruise shit. It's like throughout, and it happens in these movies, and it also happens in the Mission Impossible movies too, where you've got like a Henry Cavill in Fallout, right? Where it's like, you know,
Jeremy Renner, the new crop coming up, yeah.
And then there's people like Alec Baldwin in Fallout and in Rogue Nation, where it's like, Alec Baldwin is the same age as Tom Cruise. At one point, he was a contemporary. He was doing the same types of movies as Tom Cruise.
Sure, yeah.
But now he's like, no, I'm the guy who sits behind the desk, you know, or whatever. And I think it's a fascinating thing with his movies, where it's basically like, I am the only one who can still do this, and I am here to save and to do this mission that no one else can do. Whether it's this movie or the Mission Impossible movies. It's very much about that in these movies. And whether that's conscious or not, it is definitely, I think, part of the vibe of these movies. And I think is a key thing of Tom Cruise's sort of, when we talked about him in Oblivion, right? We talked about he was sort of like in this sort of like fallow period, right? Where he was trying to figure out his way back. And I think the way he figured out his way back is that he kind of crafted his movie star persona to be more like, I think, what Tom Cruise in real life is like, which is kind of a maniac who will do whatever he needs to do to get the thing done the way he thinks it needs to get done, you know?
And weirdly sympathetic and weirdly likable, and you weirdly want to root for it. Like, you know, when all the stuff came out about Tom Cruise, you know, the jumping on the couch moment and all that, those things, like, as much as I had liked him in so many movies that I grew up with, like, I was ready to just accept Tom Cruise as this Hollywood crazy person and, you know, kind of like cancel him in some sense. Like, okay, this is just a weird dude, and there's better people making better movies. So I never really wanted to call myself a Tom Cruise fan. And yet he started doing stuff like this. It's like, okay, this is why, right? Like, he has something about him that, like, you just can't discount him. You can't ever just completely write him off, because he has the ability to do this. And like I said, when he does this little introduction to Top Gun Maverick, like, I'm ready to stand up and cheer then. And the movie hadn't even started yet, right? It's like, good on you, Tom Cruise. You did it. You pulled it off somehow against all odds. You did it. And I don't know. I said that before, but there is something like, I want to not like him, and yet I like him. And there's talking about making another one of these potentially that I assume he is going to, at least in some way, be involved in. There's another Mission Impossible movie coming out. I'm like, I'll see them all.
Yeah. Well, there's that movie that never got made, or I don't know what the deal with is, that Doug Liman movie that he was going to do, where he was like literally going to go to space. That was like before the pandemic.
Oh, right. Yeah. They were going to shoot it in space.
Yeah. They're going to shoot it in space. And it's like, you know, he got to the point where he only basically works with three people. He works with Doug Liman. He'll work with Christopher McQuarrie, and he'll work with Joseph Kosinski. Those are the three people he'll work with, because I think they fit his vibe, right? Especially McQuarrie, obviously. McQuarrie was you can feel the McQuarrie all over this Top Gun Maverick. It basically feels like a spin-off of Mission Impossible in a lot of ways, in the way it's sort of constructed and even filmed, and we'll talk about that as we get into it a little bit. But he likes these directors who, I think, not that he can push them around, because I don't think really that's his vibe. And you hear these people talk about him, and that's not the vibe, right?
No,
but
and they are very like confident directors, right? Like, all these interviews that I've watched with Kosinski, he's very controlled, very measured. Like, he is not a pushover sort of director. Like, he works with this actor who is, you know, a big name, but like seems to be able to comport himself in those situations where Tom Cruise isn't running the show. I feel, and hopefully we will be able to rectify this a little bit, like, this was almost kind of credited to Tom Cruise. Like, this is his movie. He was the visionary that made this happen. But like, this doesn't happen without a very, very good director. It's not nearly as good as it is without a Joseph Kosinski. Like, talk about coming into your own here. Like, we've talked about 3 movies, one of which was very, very good. That we talked about last week with Only the Brave, but like, this is a huge step up even from that, I feel like. And
it is. And I mean, we might as well talk about this right now. I half agree with you, right? I think that, yes, this is not Tom Cruise didn't direct this movie. that you need somebody good. And it's not like Tom Cruise is like, okay, I'm done working with like auteurs. I'm going to work with shitty directors. He still works with good directors. But I think he works with directors who let him be a huge part of the filmmaking process of all of these movies. Because if you look at the behind the scenes stuff of the movies, this movie especially, and you hear even Kosinski talk about it, he's like, Tom was like directing scenes. He was like teaching the actors how to, because they had to like they had to like start rolling their own cameras when they were in the planes and like make sure that the lighting was good in the planes. He's like, Tom was breaking down for them how to work, that he was diagramming scenes in the morning about how they were going to do stuff. I mean, that's what a director does, right? So I think that there is and I don't think this is a slight on Kosinski at all, but I think there's a reason why this is such a level up for Kosinski. Whereas because I think in this movie, you know, him and Cruise were very collaborative in the creation of this movie and the direction of this movie. And I think that some of his weaknesses, I think, were able to be hemmed in because he had really strong collaborators sort of with him. Because we talked about the collaborators sometimes in his other movies, right? Obviously, great cinematographer who's also on this movie, Claudio Miranda. But yeah, he's a lot of time working with inexperienced screenwriters or or character actors or, you know, stuff like that where, you know, or it's his thing, like Oblivion was his thing, right? Even though
I was going to say, like, Oblivion is the one that we really need to talk about in comparison to this, because again, it's Kosinski and Cruise working together, and Cruise did have some influence over that one, and clearly not enough.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? Or maybe they just weren't. For that concept, they're not. Those ideas weren't compatible, right? In what they wanted to do.
And here, yeah, they're definitely simpatico in a lot of ways.
Absolutely, but
I think they both had the same idea of what this needed to be.
Yes, yeah,
maybe that's what I was saying.
Yeah, no, but I think that the credit though goes to the fact that you don't get a movie like this without like a village of people working on it, and I think there are auteur moments for both Cruise and for Kosinski on this movie, but I think this is a great example of not one that disproves auteur theory, but I think that I think challenges it a little bit, because it very much is obviously a cooperative experience between a very strong star, right? A very strong writer who's also director in Macquarie, he's also a producer on this movie. One of the most storied and involved producers in history, in Jerry Bruckheimer, right? Yeah. The thing has been trying to be made for, you know, before it was made, you know, it started 2010. It started like, you know, originally supposed to be Tony Scott again directing it before his death. And, you know, in the research, it's mentioned that Cruise had kind of been negative on the movie for a lot of years. And I think we talked about this in Oblivion, so I don't want to, you know, repeat ourselves too much, but Cruise has had very distinct sort of eras in his career. And he definitely had an era in his career where he was trying to do much more quote unquote serious.
Well, it's the Born on the 4th of July, Few Good Men, that sort of era. And that's when he really, it's one interview. He was interviewed in Playboy around that time, like when Born on the 4th of July was coming out, like 89, 90. And he was kind of just making the distinction between what Top Gun is and what that movie is. Like, that is a very sort of strong anti-war movie, and Top Gun is obviously very pro-military. And, you know, he made some comments like, well, Top Gun is a thrill ride. It's an amusement park thing. And like Born on the 4th of July is a real movie in some sense, right? Like it's a real statement. But I mean, of course, that's what he was going to say in that period. And that was kind of his last word. Like, okay. And, you know, along with that, he also mentioned, like, I think the question was something about, would you ever make another Top Gun? And that's how that came about. But then he didn't really talk about it at all. I don't think I don't ever remember this coming up in the 90s, because I would have been pumped for this in the 90s. I was still a kid at the time, but you know, until, or even the early 2000s, until 2010, like, you know, he'd never been asked about it again. So I think that was just sort of the last word, and that's what people had to go on when all of a sudden in that phase of his career, as you were saying, that he goes into in 2010, okay, now this makes sense again, and now I have to kind of play ball with this.
Yeah, because it's like, you know, he goes into this let's go to safe ground sort of era of his career, which has been the last 10 or so years of his career, right? Which is Mission Impossible has been the thing mostly, right? Or almost completely, but it's like, let's go to the thing that I know people like, that I can put all the big Tom Cruise action stuff into, that they fit and they work. And no matter what we decide to do, it all kind of fits into this playground, right? I've got my guy now. I've got Christian McQuarrie, who like we work well together. He gets me, I get him. He'll be, he'll be all over every project I do from now on. But I want to be into safe territory, because after his kind of fall, it took so long for him to really get back to being like the guy again. And
right. Well, and a lot of it was that tabloid stuff we were talking about.
Like all of it was
that period of career.
Yeah. His.
Well, it also, not all the movies were great choices either.
Yes, but if he didn't have that negative sort of PR, I think different movies would have been open to him at certain times, right? Because remember, he's coming off doing a Spielberg movie when all this goes down. It's not like Steven comes calling again and is like, "Hey Tom, you want to be in my next movie?" So
he's the best thing about that movie. I don't like that movie, but I like Tom Cruise.
War of the Worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that movie's fine. That movie's good. It's a good movie, but it has some issues. But anyway, after that period, like, a big movie star can make mediocre movies and they still make money, right? It just because of his sort of public persona, I think he was kind of in the dumps. And people forget that really before he does Mission Impossible 2 in 2001, 2000, whatever.
2000.
2000?
Yeah, I think 2000.
He had never done a sequel to anything before. And until he does, Jack Reacher, Never Go Back or whatever, Never Back Down, he had never done a sequel to anything that wasn't a Mission Impossible movie. So like this was not a thing for him. He was not a guy who did franchise movies, right? He was a guy who did big movies with big directors and big filmmakers, but they were always one and done things, right? Where the star of it was not, this is a Mission Impossible movie. The star of it was, this is a Tom Cruise movie, right? Top Gun makes $186 million in 1996 because Tom Cruise is the star of it, not because anybody gives a shit about Top Gun or airplanes, really, or Tony Scott. It's because Tom Cruise is the star of it, and Tom Cruise is the biggest shit in the world, right? So he goes back to safe ground with this 2010, right? And that's when McQuarrie is working on a draft of the screenplay, and then all the usual like peeps coming through at that point. Like you had Ashley Miller and Zach Stens in the two really good TV shows, right? Terminator, Sarah Connor Chronicles, and Fringe. But they're from like this like J.J. Abrams like adjacent sort of pool of writers who are starting to become like,
they're the remake guys at this point.
Yes.
You're doing a new version of everything, and these are the people that are coming up through the television shows at the time that are gonna relaunch all these Star Trek and all those franchises.
Absolutely, yeah. The Kurtzman and Orsi, all this like this group of people, right? Peter Craig, who did The Town, writes a draft before Tony Scott dies. At that point, this whole drone thing was very kind of new and in the news. And apparently that was like a big part of the story of those, of that movie, of that draft back then, was like really focusing on like kind of like what they did in Stealth, right? Which is like this idea of like this drone versus whatever. And
yeah, the idea was going to be, here's Maverick, this sort of relic from the earlier age of human powered dogfighting, which might have been an interesting take on Top Gun, but I'm actually so glad they didn't go that direction. Like I think what they did, it's not a brilliant idea, but it's exactly what this movie should have been, and allows them to do the things that this movie needs to do in a way that probably wouldn't have, right? That would have been Oblivion again. That would have been, Tom Cruise and computers. And this is, I think, much more of a human story that I like a lot.
It's also too like a thing where that was an en vogue thing in that time, and by the time they would have made the movie, even if they had made it back then, it would have been old hat at that point. People have been rolling their eyes already at it. Tony Scott dies, and so it's the movie is gonna go though, right? We're in 2010, 2011. The movie's gonna go. Tony Scott dies in 2012. So the project kind of put on hold for 2 years. And some of the credited screenwriters on this, it's amazing that the movie turned out as good as it did, because we've got some of the classic shitty screenwriters.
Development history. Yeah, Aaron Kruger. You're talking about Aaron Kruger.
Aaron Kruger and Justin Marks. Both of them. Justin Marks I talked about years ago when I was doing Fanboy Remix with our friend Brian, another podcast. Justin Marks was one of these guys who like wrote one thing that somebody liked, and then they put him on like every franchise thing that existed. And he wrote Street Fighter: Legend of Chun-Li, which is one of the worst studio movies I think ever made. It's got, if you've never seen a supercut of Chris Klein's performance in Street Fighter: Legend of Chun-Li,
I forgot that is that. Yeah. I remember that movie.
it's an all-timer. It's like, it's not as good as Nicolas Cage and, The Wicker Man, but it is like in that zone of great.
It's an inferior sequel to Street Fighter, which is not a great movie in and of itself.
No.
Yeah.
So Justin Marks, is credited with additional screenplay draft, and I think he's got a story by credit. I think with Peter Craig.
Yeah.
I think they've got the story credit. And one day we'll go into like how these things work in movies, because it's like a really weird thing, right? But
yeah, well, a lot of people had their hands on this.
yeah. It's got 2 story by credits, and then 3 or 4 screenplay by credits.
Well, we have the original writers of Top Gun, characters created by. Then you have Craig and Marks, who basically came up with it, and not all the elements of the story, because we haven't gotten this far in the history of it yet. But when Kosinski comes on board, that's when we get the meat of what this actually is. And both of his ideas that he pitches to Tom Cruise end up in the movie. One of them is kind of a opening sequence, which I can't wait to talk about because I just love the shit out of it. And the rest of it kind of the A plot for the entire movie. So at this point, Kosinski is really starting, as I said, to come into his own, and Tom Cruise is listening to him. He pitched him on the set of a Mission Impossible movie, and that was the thing that and the inclusion of Val Kilmer, which I think is another thing we're gonna.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that scene's huge, and we'll definitely talk about that scene. So Tom Cruise officially joins the project in January 2016. Kosinski is a year later in 2017, right? And yeah, like you said, he pitched him like he had 30 minutes to talk to him on the set of Mission Impossible Fallout, to pitch him ideas, to kind of be like, because Cruise, although signed on the project, is like, it's not going to go until I'm happy with what it is, like until there's a hook. Like, I'm not going to do it until it feels like it's like there's a real reason for us to do it, right? So,
which is very smart on his part. Like there's so many bad ways to make a Top Gun sequel, especially 20, 30 years later, that you really got to give Tom Cruise some credit for holding out for the right thing. And, when that happens, these are like, as much as I don't like these remakes and Lego sequels and all that stuff, if you've got the right idea, if it's not The Force Awakens, you have potential. There is a way to do it right. It's just, you got to wait for that, right? You can't just be like, okay, we bought this property, we're making a new movie, let's go. We got a couple of the original actors back. You got to have all that, but then you also have to have the idea that is, I mean, what Top Gun Maverick does, I think, in a really brilliant way, and I'm not the first one to say this, is it nails the nostalgia part of it, but also it's a good movie on its own. Like you were saying, a couple people that you saw it with were not fans and had not seen the original movie. And so, like, I'm interested, like, to me, I mean, this movie works on so many levels because I did love Top Gun, but I'd be very interested to show this to someone who is not familiar with yours. I was actually watching it this time. I was thinking about building this into my syllabus for my intro to film, my film study and appreciation course, because we do spend some time talking about editing, and I cannot wait to talk about the editing in this movie and how good it is. But I'm like, I wonder if my, mostly 18, 19-year-old student, I mean, I have some older students too, who I know have seen the original, but the rest of them are like, would this be anything for them? I mean, obviously I think they'd be impressed by the editing, but
I don't think you need to have any connection to the original movie to enjoy this movie. I don't think you need to have any connection to it.
I think it enhances it a lot, though.
I think so. Maybe it depends how you feel about the first movie. You know what I mean? I think that's definitely I think is the thing.
If the line "Talk to me, Goose" does nothing for you, then you don't have a soul.
But I think that no. I'm not saying that I don't think the line is good, and I think that concept is good. But I think the movie does a good job of setting up the stakes of that situation within itself, so that you don't even really, knowing that one really emotional moment that happens in Top Gun, which is truly, again, this is one of the things where it's a movie of moments that are remembered, that are surrounded by a lot of sort of like silliness, right? And sort of pop entertainment, which is all good.
Well, there's a lot of that here too.
Yes, absolutely. But this moment, right, is the moment that they zero in on. And the fact that it wasn't in the original, like all the drafts of the screenplay seems crazy to me because it seems so obvious, right? But I think the movie does a good job of, because it smartly gives Rooster and some of the other people some time to have their own development. I think it sets up its own stakes within the movie. So that if you have not seen the original, I don't think it too much takes away from what you're watching here. But we said,
we're also missing another major character. We were talking before about the romance aspect of Top Gun, and Kelly McGillis is nowhere to be seen in this movie. And I was kind of looking for that. Like, was she approached? And she seems like the one piece of the puzzle that was just never really.
This movie has no interest in bringing back any of the women who were in the previous Top Gun movie at all.
No, although I guess Jennifer Connelly's character is supposed to be, there's a line in the original movie, which I don't remember at all, something about Maverick messing around with an admiral's daughter behind, his superior's back or something like that. And she is supposed to be that person, like all grown up and having had an experience of Maverick. And like, I actually really, really like the middle-aged romance in this movie. I think a lot of that is just because what is a better screen couple? Like, who could be more beautiful than Tom Cruise and Jennifer Connelly in this movie? But that, that's like the one sort of nod toward Maverick's romantic history, or his history of conquests and womanizing or whatever that gets dealt with in this movie. But again, that's one of those things, right? Like, if you don't know much about this character and he's just another one of those like rebel sort of Hollywood Han Solo types, it works in the context of this one, but kind of knowing what that film was and that it was so much a romance, I don't know. It sort of makes that whole dimension of this one work better for me also. I don't know. I mean, this movie, it's not one of those sequels where it just doesn't work without the original there. But I do think, if this movie's an 8 for you, just seeing it without the prior knowledge of the original, it's a 10 if you have it. Like, it does,
What if it's an 8 for me either way?
I mean, to each his own.
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
Yeah. But I think
hold on. Let me not. It's not a 10. It's a 9.25, maybe. We'll get into it.
Yeah, we'll get into it. Basically, Kosinski approaches Cruise, has his meeting with him, pitches two things, right? The Rooster idea and their relationship, and also this idea of where is Maverick now 30 plus years later? What is he doing? What would he be doing? And he pitches the idea of this test pilot thing, right? This idea that he's a test pilot, testing these experimental secretive aircraft, and that's how he's still... That's how we can explain how it's been 30 years and he's this great pilot, but he's still a captain, right? That he hasn't sort of moved on from this thing, and he's sort of like stuck in this moment and this sort of idea. Kosinski brings in some of his people right here too. So Eric Warren Singer, who was the writer on Only the Brave, comes in and rewrites in 2017, and then Cruise brings in Macquarie and he rewrites. And while they're shooting, which completely tracks to me, with this kind of movie, how big it is, how many moving pieces it is. So many of these movies now go into production without really like a set finished script. It's like, we have these big moments that we want to do, and then we'll figure it out after that. We'll figure out a little stuff after that. Let's
bring in Christopher McQuarrie to make it a little more of a Tom Cruise movie.
Yeah, exactly.
I really, really I have no idea why. Like, I understand why a lot of the actors who are in this got to do a lot of actual flying because they were doing it and they're running the cameras on the planes. But like, everything I read about Christopher McQuarrie's involvement in this said he flew with the Blue Angels to write this. Is like, why do you need the rewrite guy coming in to make this more of a Mission Impossible Tom Cruise movie? Did he just want to fly with the Blue? Like, I completely understand, but I don't think that added anything to Christopher McQuarrie's contribution to this. I think it was just a cool experience that he got to have because of that.
No, but you can definitely see with stuff stories like that, right? Why him and Cruise are understand each other and like work together so much, right? Because it seems like McQuarrie's also kind of a crazy weirdo who wants to like experience these intensely scary things, And
after getting his start with Bryan Singer, Tom Cruise is a pretty good guy. Pretty acceptable person to hang out with.
Yeah, exactly. The nightmare person that was Bryan Singer. Very normal guy who definitely showed up every day to direct all his movies. There aren't these stories about him not being on set for weeks at a time. Such a weird thing, man. For somebody who, we are of the same age, was like one of the guys when we were kids, when we were first becoming like
Usual
film
Suspects
people.
And the first X-Men.
Yeah, you're like, this is one of the guys,
movies.
you know, and now it's like, oh my God, what a nightmare person. The other person who gets credit on the screenplay is Ehren Kruger, who I just gotta say, I bet that because of the kind of directors we're gonna do, Ehren Kruger is gonna come up more than once in our sort of like travels around this.
And that's just the stuff he's credited for.
Yeah.
He's probably done uncredited rewrites on like everything that's been made the past 30 years.
Yeah, Ehren Kruger is one of those guys, and we'll talk about these people as we go across the time, who I don't think has ever written a truly good screenplay, yet gets to keep writing movie after movie because he just seems to be good at networking with people. That's what it feels like to me. People like him, I think, and that's why he gets to do it. But his credits, he ends up being the credited screenwriter on Scream 3, right? Because they kicked Kevin Williamson out of that production. It's the worst Scream movie by far.
Well, that's how I knew who he was back then, right? What was that, about 2000, 99, 2000? And I was like, who wrote this piece of shit? Ehren Kruger. And so like that was always a red flag because he has been involved in so many movies since then. And you see his name coming up on the opening credits, like,
his name will be on some good movies. Like this movie is great.
Yeah, for sure.
I think he's the only credited screenwriter on The Ring, which is a fantastic movie, right?
Not a bad script either.
No, not a bad script either. Again, he is basically adapting, you know, a already existing script. And for all I hear, you know, Verbinski had a lot to do with how that movie was sort of like developed and made, but he's able to work with people. And I think that's part of the reason why he keeps getting put in these movies. But he'll come up again. He's a terrible screenwriter. He's a hack, but you know, he's one of the credited screenwriters on this movie, right? You get Ehren Kruger in because he can deliver a draft probably on time, and you can have the bones to start your movie. I think that's a lot of the reason
and
why.
then somebody else can kind of fine tune it and make it better.
And then Chris McQuarrie comes in and goes like, okay, this is like a fine skeleton, but I'm gonna put the muscle and the meat on this thing, right? Teller and Connolly come over from Only the Brave, right? You know, Kosinski has said that Teller was his first choice, you know, for Rooster. Glenn Powell also auditioned for Rooster. So did Nicholas Hoult. Tom Cruise really likes Nicholas Hoult. He wanted Hoult to be in the Mission Impossible movies, and it just never worked out with scheduling and stuff like that. Probably because Fury Road, you know, took 7.5 years to film and was always getting called back. Yeah, it was definitely worth it. But so they cast Teller as Rooster. Glenn Powell, they offer Glenn Powell the hangman part, and he eventually turns it down because he's like, what do we say, that Dick Garnish? Is that what he wrote?
I love this so much. Yeah. Like in all of my research about this movie, my favorite thing that I saw was Glenn Powell was approached. He auditioned for Rooster. He doesn't get the part. They like him. They want him to play this other pilot who's kind of the, he's the Iceman of this movie. And he said, well, I don't just want to be Dick Garnish, which is just such a great phrase. I've never heard that before. I can't imagine how, like, I don't know much about Glenn Powell. I guess maybe he came up with that on his own, but if he did, I like him that much more. But maybe. Well, it's interesting in this movie because his character and John Hamm's characters, I fucking hate the both of them for about 95% of this movie. Then they both have their little redemptive moments in the end. But like, even though like they are the villains of this movie, they are the antagonists of this movie, and they're great at it. Like they're just awful. And I really like both of those performances a lot.
Oh, me too. And I think Glenn Powell, from all accounts, you know, he's sort of been ready to sort of like pop for a while. Obviously it's happening now. He really wanted to play Rooster, like really badly. Cause he was like, this is like, cause I think Glenn Powell, again, I think one of the reasons why he's on track to kind of be a kind of a movie star. He thinks like a movie star. He's like, this is the next step. Like I do the movie where I'm the protege of the biggest movie star. It raises my profile, and then the next thing I am the guy, right? And that doesn't happen. They have to convince him to do this other role. And I think actually he's sort of like a weird combination of Iceman and Maverick from the original Top Gun, because the way he acts is very Maverick-like from the first Top Gun. You know, it's just told from the different perspective where you're looking in on him instead of being from his sort of point of view.
Well, it's the self-confidence of Iceman and the rule breaking of Maverick.
Yes, absolutely.
He's too good looking to be.
Oh my God, he's so
Anthony
good.
Edwards. So he is.
What a good looking man.
I mean, I guess it worked for Tom Cruise in the original Top Gun, but yeah, he's a very, very handsome dude. But like that to me, he doesn't work on that role at all. And that's another one of those choices, right? Like, he is a good actor. He is, I think, on track to be a movie star. And he's like one of the, like, I still have not seen Anyone But You. What's like
Anyone But You.
Glenn Powell and Sydney Sweeney are like, that's the leading man and leading lady for like Hollywood going forward for a little bit. And that makes sense, right? But like, I don't know. I do not see him in this role, and I do not see this movie working nearly as well with him. Like, Miles Teller is a perfect, and I'm not the biggest fan of his, but I don't know. I really, and as you were saying before, you know, is he just doing an Anthony Edwards impersonation?
I wasn't saying that as like as a dig on him. I was saying that as like, I think it informs me a little bit more on how sort of methody Miles Teller is about how how seriously he takes every role, that he would extract some of those mannerisms and sort of speaking styles, which I don't think it's an impression in sort of a negative way. I just think it's the thing that makes Teller good and also can make him unbearable in movies, which is he's so into like being an actor. You know what I mean? And sometimes that's great, obviously, and sometimes that can be a little off-putting when you kind of don't know how to contain it. We don't have somebody who can sort of guide you in the proper ways, right? When he works with really strong directors, obviously he can be guided in whatever way he needs to be. This is also, you know, there's obviously the enemy is Russian, Afghanistan.
Not according to the movie.
You know, but I'm saying it's like
it's completely nameless, completely faceless. They are referred to as the enemy.
Yeah.
I love, like, one of my favorite dumb things that this movie does is the phrase fifth generation.
Oh my God, I wrote that down
gets
so
brought
many
up
times.
Constantly. And it's like, I get that, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's the new technology versus the old. It's the high tech stuff versus the human stuff. And all of that works, and all those themes, I think, play out really nicely here. But if they sent fifth generation fighters, they've got fifth generation fighters. Can you do that against fifth generation fighters?
Yeah, I know.
Like, I want to start just like working that into normal everyday conversations.
I want to work that, and he pulled my papers into my conversation, because I think those two things are the things that are said the most in this entire screenplay. Are those
Hard
two.
deck.
Hard
Also,
deck. Oh yeah, hard deck.
And hard deck too.
Hard deck is a big thing. You know, because in the original movie they're Russians. They're straight up. They're just Russians.
Well, they're
flying
the planes
MiGs.
are Russians. They're
flying
flying MiGs.
Yeah.
The Cold War is still happening.
Yes.
I don't think they actually come out, and it's been a while since I've seen it. I don't think they actually come out.
No, they
and
don't. But they say
Russians.
MiGs. Yeah.
But the planes are MiGs. Those are
Yeah.
Russian. Sure.
Yeah.
Here we get no sense of that whatsoever.
No.
Are they? Yeah.
They don't even name the planes. And in fact, the plane that they find, except for saying fifth generation fighter, they don't even say, like, they don't even give it like a company or number designation or whatever.
No, of course not, because that would identify who it is.
Yeah.
Which is, again, it's kind of a smart move. The terrain, like, this movie is about a mission. It's this sort of like last ditch thing about an enemy country who is building a nuclear facility in this mountain base that's protected by canyons and anti-aircraft fire and all that stuff. And like, you see them flying into this. It's like, so where is that? Right? It's snowy, sort of, could be like literally anywhere in the world.
Snowy, but right near the ocean.
Yep. Yeah.
You know, it's like this thing where it's like China, Russian, Afghanistan, and you know, sort of like thing to it.
Canada, possibly.
Yeah, Canada, possibly. Gonna fight it for their water.
It's a video game.
Yes.
Backdrop. Yeah.
And like, look, I don't want to harp on it because I did a podcast like a year ago where I harped on this a lot, but I think there is something sort of a little bit gross about that part of it, like that conception of it, where it's like, it's like we won't define an enemy, we won't define a conflict, we won't define like geopolitical stakes of this. The first movie, I think you can get away with it a little bit because, in contrast, it's so much of a lower stakes movie. The first one is just like, people are here to learn to be good pilots, and then something happens kind of accidentally when they're in this.
The combat mission in that movie is like really not part of the plot of that movie. That's
exactly
just a thing that gives them a third act to work with there. And like this one, in a lot of ways, that script kind of clunks along a little bit. Like, it just needs to accomplish certain things, and it just does them in the most simplistic way possible. But yeah, like, this is, I don't know. I mean, for this, I love the idea of it though, right? Like, the way this mission is set up and what it entails and what they have to do. And that's why we have this sort of competition scenario that drives basically the first half to 2/3 of the movie. I think it's a great idea. And again, I think I've mentioned it on the show before. I absolutely love, maybe it wasn't here that I've talked about it. When a movie tells you the parameters of something, it gives you the plan. And then it's like the rest of the movie, like you get to see that sort of play out and the things that happen along the way. Like we know what the end goal is, and it's just the complications and the roadblocks that are put in front of the characters. I like that, right? Like I don't like a movie necessarily unless it's a mystery, unless it's designed that way. Like when we see the mission, we know exactly how it's going to play out. I like that, right? And then, you know, a good screenwriter, which I do think this movie has a pretty solid script in a lot of ways, throws some interesting wrinkles into that, but also gives you that payoff that you need to have. Like when those missiles go into the hole, it's the Death Star. Like it's an exhaust port that they need to fire. I mean, it's exactly the Death Star, and it's perfect. Like that is exactly what this movie needs to be.
So the thing I will give this movie the most credit for, and the thing I like about it the most, right, is exactly what you're talking about. Is that I think so many problems with so many action movies, both good and bad, is that the stakes are sort of fudgy, right? It's like, what exactly are the parameters of success and failure and the end goal for what we're trying to do in this defined space, sure. Right?
And by the time we get to that sequence, we know every possible thing that can go wrong. Yes, like when they're pulling up to get out of the canyon, whatever, all of that stuff. Yes. The fact that they have to be, the time on target thing is a great little ticking clock that this script does, which I'm sure that's a real thing.
Yes. Or
this movie has some version of that's a real
ticking
thing.
Clocks within ticking clocks, right? It's like
right, exactly.
Which I love. I'm so on board with it. This movie is driven so much by process, right? About which we talked about last week. I love in movies. I love
competent professionals doing their job well.
Exactly. Competency is cool, right? That is what makes this movie cool, right? Is that these are people who are really good at what they do. And the movie, even inside of that, is really good and really smart about setting up, I'll call them for shorthand, power levels of the characters, right? Which is like,
yeah,
these are the best pilots in the world, but guess what? This dude is better, and we're going to show you he's better. And the movie is really great at storytelling through action, right? It's almost like a musical, right? But instead of them singing, they're flying airplanes, right? So when they need to get out emotions or they need to show like a story progression, they so often do it in these big aerial sequences, right? And I think that's so smart. And I think, you said right at the beginning, Maverick is better than all these people. And then break it up into each stage of the mission, and each stage of the mission will be us running through it. In the second act we'll break the second act into 3 parts, and each of that part will be one part of the mission we have to do. So like you said, they repeat it like 3 times, like exactly what the parameters are, exactly what can go wrong, exactly what can go right.
And like I was saying, I don't know if I finished my thought. When we get to that final sequence where they actually go on this mission, the actors don't even need to say it, right? Like when those planes are in a certain place or they're doing a certain thing that you've heard a couple times before, it's not like completely, smashing you over the head with it. But like we know, like this is what happens with an altitude issue, right? Like if they're pulling too many G's, which is a huge thing in this movie, like the targeting laser where they have to lock on, and then it's the second group that delivers the kill shot and all that stuff. Like we know how this is supposed to play out. We eventually, I'm so glad, and this is going to happen in the movie, but when John Hamm's character changes the mission, so they're all going to fly slower and fly higher and put themselves at incredible risk, but have a better chance of completing the mission. At that point, we are so invested in this, and we want it to go Maverick's way so badly that we're just against that right away. Like as soon as he starts talking about it, like, no, they got to fly through the canyon. We got to get this 2.5 minute window so they can get in there. And and I love, again, it's probably all very contrived, but it's contrived in a way. And this whole movie's like this, right? Like it's a finely oiled machine, but sometimes you can kind of hear the gears grinding a little bit. Like it's not perfect. It's not naturalistic in any way, but the whole way that this mission is designed, right? Like there's a lead up, you were saying, right? It's broken down into 3 parts. And then the aftermath of it is just as bad, right? Like that's when the 5th generation fighters come into play there, and they actually have to face them. And so, this is going to have that climax, like when they actually hit the target, that's not the end. And it's not even close to the end. And it maybe goes a little farther past that. There's like kind of two climaxes in this movie, one of which is maybe not necessary, but up until that point, everything is like exactly as you wanted it to be and exactly as they said it was going to be. It doesn't pull any punches and it doesn't cheat you out of the things that you absolutely want to see kind of all the way throughout.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is like when the part where Charles Parnell's character Warlock is basically breaking down for the last time, and he's got like the screen and the red line is showing and they're breaking down all the little things. I'm like, this is like what I love about movies, right? Is this stuff, and the point you said too, where when John Hamm makes that plan, I don't know anything about airplanes, but at this point the movie has taught me about this mission where I'm like, you're crazy, John Hamm. You can't do it like this, and I really love that about this, right? And so, a big part of this, right, is how they capture the aerial sequences that get you so invested in it. And, they, I watched a lot of behind the scenes stuff about this, right? And they basically took these IMAX cameras, right? These Sony 6K cameras, and have these versions where you can detach sort of like the lens from like the recording part and kind of have them far away from each other. So they mounted, I think it was 6 cameras in the airplanes themselves, and they had to work with the Navy to be like, where can I put them so that it doesn't mess up the flying? Where can we put them so that, or how can we attach them so nothing comes loose and hits somebody when they're going like, pulling 10 Gs or what have you.
So there's an incredible shot in this one. I don't know that I've ever seen it exactly like this anywhere before. It's late in the movie. I think you get it most, but maybe they do it before that. But the camera's like positioned kind of outside the cockpit of the plane, looking forward. So you see kind of part of the cockpit, the nose of the plane, and like exactly what it's heading toward. And it's just such a cool shot. And seeing that on the big, like, I love just sort of fast motion in movies. Like, I remember being a kid just sitting really close, and it's like you're on a roller coaster or something like that. Like, you can feel the movement, particularly when the sound design is really amped up the way it is in this movie. And like, that is just so, like, I will never tire of that, right? I'll be 90 years old sitting in a theater if I live that long, really just sort of enjoying sequences like that. And this movie has so many of them, and just like the sense of speed and the sense of power and danger in those scenes is just, it's executed perfectly. It is, because it's all real, right?
Yeah, it's mostly real. I will say this. I want to bottle this a little bit, because there are a lot of visual effects shots in the movie. Obviously, you in the notes, there's like 2,400. There has also been stuff that's come out where, like, even some of the behind the scenes stuff, which has been doctored to look like it was more sort of like exactly like it looks in the movie, like, than it actually was. Like, not that these guys learned how to fly airplanes. They did a lot of high speed stuff, but there was stuff on green screen. There was, but most of it is real, which is the important thing. I just think that sometimes these people get too into it with the marketing, right? Where they're like, no, you don't understand. Everything is real. Every shot is real. And it's like,
no. And that's certainly not what I'm saying. Like, they didn't really have an F-14. Like, the climax of this movie heavily involves an F-14, and reading about the fact that, like, you can't get one of those anymore makes me sad. Also makes me feel very old that they scuttled them so people couldn't get the parts, and the countries that do have them are not friends with us anymore, so they couldn't get any F-14s from them. So yeah, a lot of that stuff is fake, and that whole last sequence is pretty fake. But like, the speed, right? Like, the fact that they had a camera on one of these planes going as fast as it did, and it like, Kosinski, again, is very good at this stuff. He knows where to put that camera and how to shoot this sequence. So you do feel that sense of speed. Like, that is real. It's a real plane going really fast, and that's all it needs to be. Whether the people in it are in any kind of danger or anything, that doesn't matter to me here. It's just, in the moment, it's believable and it feels real. And after being conditioned for as long as we were leading up to this with, how many, there's a World War II film, George Lucas is the one about the Red Tails, about the Tuskegee Airmen, which, like, I've always found them like fascinating and always wanted someone to make a movie about them. And then George Lucas does it, and it's just like a computer game. And I was like, how could they? And so, like, and Flyboys, the World War I, like, that's another era. Like, I want to see a great World War I flying movie, but not one that has like PlayStation 2 CGI in it. So this movie does not feel like, that's what I meant when I said it's all real in some sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then, like, the special cameras, they also had like other jets that have cameras mounted on them, which is probably how they got that shot that you're talking about. But they actually have like almost like helicopters, aerial helicopter photography, but with these jets. It's like crazy. If you watch the behind the scenes on the Blu-ray, it's insane what they look like, right? And what they do and how fast they fucking fly with these cameras on them, right? So they did all this stuff, which is amazing, right? And then, we should just get into talking about the movie, because they also built this fucking airplane that's at the beginning of the movie, right? This, the Dark Star.
Named after a terrific John Carpenter movie.
The first John Carpenter movie. Airplane that Kosinski helped design with the Skunk Works team at Lockheed Martin, essentially. But this is where we start, right? First of all, we start with the kind of recreation of the original Top Gun.
That's like, it's been a while, but that's pretty much the exact same opening sequence, right?
It's pretty much the same. Yes, it's pretty much the same. There, like I said, that's one of the times though you can most see the difference in like probably A, what they're shooting it on, for one thing, right? But B, just some of the Tony Scott, like, it's a little grimier, it's a little more sweaty, it's a little more like...
Yeah, this is a little more...
it's a little more Kosinski.
This is one of those, like, yeah, absolutely. This is, you're watching a football game and be all that you can be, or,
Yeah, whatever the Navy one is.
The Air Force?
No, this is the Navy.
Sorry.
Don't you dare.
Right.
They're Navy airmen,
sorry.
okay? There's a little bit more like that, right? Though I will say in this movie, I think it's the least commercially of one of his movies, like as far as the way it looks, in a lot of its ways.
And this, that opening sequence is just an opening sequence. And once we get past that, and I will tell you what makes it work for me, and a thing that I'm so glad they did, they've got the score. They've got Harold Faltermeyer. That theme, the Top Gun theme, that's another thing that I absolutely love about that original movie. Like, I've had that on so many playlists for not doing things remotely as exciting as piloting an F-14, landing on a carrier, anything like that. But, sports stuff, high school, those things, the Top Gun theme, and then Danger Zone, right? We get right into that because you got to do it. They get it out of the way very, very quickly. They do this kind of very similar scene to what's in the original movie. That's the bone thrown, particularly to the old school fans there. But I remember being in the theater and just hearing those first couple notes of that theme. And I didn't know, I tried to go into it as blindly as I could. You don't see Harold Faltermeyer's name until the credits, which are later in this sequence. But I just remember hearing those first couple, those bass chime things that are at the beginning of that. And I was like, all right, here we go. I'm kind of into this already. This better not suck, because it's working pretty great in the first seconds of it.
It is one of the things where it's even more though disconnected sort of like plot wise from this movie than it even is in the first movie.
Has nothing to do with anything.
No, because the next thing you see is him walking out into his crazy, hangar house or whatever that he lives in.
Oh boy, do I love that too.
I'm like, because it's like, what money is he using to own this hangar? But that's again one of the things where it's like, it's just a beautifully designed space. I like that opening. Lauren Balfe does the rest of the score to this, right?
And Hans Zimmer has a credit on
as well. So does Lady Gaga. They all three have kind of got the credits on it. And I will say, I think Gaga's song is good. That it plays at the every end of the movie. It's not as iconic, obviously, as Take My Breath Away.
Sure.
But it's still, I think it's a really good movie. One of the things I like, I will say about this movie that I do really like is that it has elements of blockbusters that don't exist as much anymore, right? It's got a romance in it. It's got a big song in it. I don't need it to be for everyone, right? Every blockbuster, but it's nice that some of this can exist in this space. And I really liked that about this. And that sort of,
what else has that is Only the Brave.
It's true. It does. That's not a blockbuster though. Nick.
No, but it was intended to be.
Yeah. I don't know if
Dierks Bentley is not quite Lady Gaga. There is that movie felt like a throwback to me, and this one obviously, was intended to be a throwback.
It was intended to be a throwback.
It's an era of blockbusters that I really miss, and I think a lot of people that were around for it miss it. So I like that a lot.
You are, man, are you, it sounds like the world's going to end.
It is a pretty bad storm happening here. Yeah.
I think one thing I didn't articulate about Only the Brave is that I do want movies like that to exist, but I want them to exist, and I want the things that were sort of weaknesses of those older movies, like shortchanging certain characters and writing things in certain sort of ways to get. We don't have to just go back. We can make them and then be a little bit better. And I think this does that in a lot of ways, right? It takes some of those tropes and sort of it keeps some of them. and also sort of enhances other ones, right? So and sort of furthers that that style of movie making a little bit.
Well, I agree with that. And we talked about this with Only the Brave. It was kind of like a test run for this in some ways. Like, I know the pieces were not exactly in place. I mean, that's not actually the story of this. But if you look at those two movies together, it is, this has one of the same problems as we were talking about with that movie, where there's a lot of supporting characters. They don't all get the screen time or the sort of the dialogue or just the moments that they need to really resonate. Most of the pilots, aside from Hangman and Rooster, obviously, Phoenix to some extent, because like the sort of female team leader.
I like her a lot.
In this.
She's very good.
I like her a lot too, right? But we need a little bit more of her, I feel like. And when we get to the final sequence, there's a couple of pilots there that like we've barely seen in the movie up until that point. And I know that's sort of how it has to be, and it's not quite as bad as Only Griffiths, 19, 20 of them in that movie. But still, I felt a little bit of that same thing where it's like, this. In some ways, this could have been a series. We could have developed this a little bit further.
They're way more distinct, though, than the original movie, though. Outside of Iceman and Maverick and Goose,
definitely.
like all those other pilots are like just they could be anybody, And I feel like at least in this, like I think the guy who plays Bob is really good. I like him.
I like him. Did you know Louis Pullman? Did you know that's actually Bill Pullman's son?
I did know that. Yes, I did know that.
I did not. I've seen him in other things. I really liked it. I was like,
Yeah.
I thought that was a more common name than it is.
I think he's really
and now
good.
I'm watching it. Yeah, I like him too. And he reminds me, again, a little bit of his dad. So.
Yeah, definitely. I thought Phoenix was good. So I think there's at least a little bit more, here to grab onto as far as those people. They're not just like sweaty men with dark hair in a room, because that's kind of what the first movie is in a lot of ways. But this first sequence, right? This is like, okay, let's establish where Maverick is, what he's doing, right? First of all, he's alone in the hangar. We get the pictures, right, to sort of like bring us into like he's still obsessed with what happened to Goose. He's pictures all over his house, and then he goes for this sort of test pilot thing.
As much as I really, really like this movie, and I think it's the first 30 minutes that are far and away my favorite things in it. Like this movie, like I think the first 30 minutes of this movie are just unassailable. Like it's perfect. It's exactly what I want. Until like after that, you can kind of see, as I said, the gear is starting to grind a little bit. The contrivances get a little bit tougher for me to deal with. There are things that it does that I'm not crazy about. And there's I don't necessarily want to call it stupidity, but kind of clunkiness about things that happen later on. But the way this movie reintroduces Maverick and this whole Dark Star thing, like this opening sequence where he's a test pilot, he's meant to take this plane farther than it's ever taken, pushing the plane and himself to limits that were sort of unthought of before, and the way he defies Ed Harris's character. The shot of that plane flying over Ed Harris's fucking head is just like, give me that 1,000 times in 1,000 different movies. And I love Ed Harris. But I love the way that all plays out. The wide shot in that sequence is incredible. This reminds me a little bit of, what's the Damien Chazelle, First Man. Yeah, I couldn't think of the title of it. There's a sequence very similar to this in that movie. Also great there. Damien Chazelle, Miles Teller, the whole Pepe Sylvia thing, just connecting the threads here. But like, I love those kinds of sequences, and maybe it's the aviation thing or something like that. But it's just the way that scene plays and the tension there, the way that we don't see the climax of it, and then Tom Cruise just sort of walks into a diner in the middle of nowhere. It's this little comedic moment where he takes his helmet off and where am I? And the kid says Earth. In a lesser movie, that would be a dumb sitcom-y sort of moment. Here, I'm like, that's exactly what I want in the Top Gun sequel. Literally everything in the first 30 minutes of this. We get the introduction of the mission. We get the first sort of head-butting between him and John Hamm's character. I think it perfectly sets up what this movie is and the tone of it. When he first walks into the bar and interacts with Jennifer Connelly's character, it's like I'm so into this in that opening sequence, and it's like it would have to do so much to pull me out of it.
These rules though at the bar, I don't think I would like to be a patron at the bar with the rules. I'm like, that's a lot of money. I think the first sequence is really good, like using that wide shot where it shows like the plane sort of like turning or whatever, and you see like the trail and you're seeing like Earth from like really up high. It's an incredible shot. Obviously, that's a CG shot, obviously, but like this whole sequence feels the most Kosinski to me because it feels very science fiction, right? It feels like almost a different movie in a lot of ways for that opening sequence of the movie.
There's a lot of badass looking motorcycle riding against beautiful occasions. That's Tron has a bunch of that too. We see that in Oblivion. It's Tom Cruise in Oblivion. Yeah, he's really good at those shots. The opening sequence of Only the Brave has the truck on the highway. Like, you know, if he wanted to just spend the rest of his life making car commercials, he'd make exquisite car commercials. But I do think that aesthetic really works for this, and I love that sequence so much. Oh man, and like just seeing Ed Harris, because he's not in a lot of movies anymore, and he is doing the Ed Harris thing, this gruff, bald, hard ass motherfucker.
Carved out of stone, out of cracked stone. This guy at this point,
and he looks great the first time you see him, and then we get a close up, and he's just wrinkly, like you can kind of see the wrinkles. Cracks and the grit and all that. Like it's just it's lit to really accentuate that. And I was like, nice. Like if I don't think he's made anything since this. If this is his last movie, if this is his last role, perfect way to go out for it.
The thing is, like, it's funny. He's only 10 years older than Cruise, right? Which is the funniest part.
Yeah, but he's looked older than him always and always will.
Because in this movie, they play like he's like 30 years older than him at that point. You know. I think that scene is good.
I don't know if any of the ages check out in this movie.
No. Well, that's the thing. That's the thing with all Tom Cruise movies at this point, where it's like, how old are you? How old do you want us to think you are? Like, right. I'm just curious in your brain how old you're thinking we think you are at this point.
And do we need to accept the fact that the first movie was like actually taking place in 1986? Because if so, wouldn't Rooster be a ton younger than he is?
Ton younger than he is? He would be older, wouldn't he?
Older, sorry. I mean, the character is younger than he should.
Yeah, because he's in the first movie. You know?
Yeah, he's like not a baby. He's like grown.
Well, I think that's what they try to sort of get around that by being like, well, he's a little bit older than most of these pilots because he got set back 4 years by Maverick pulling his papers from the Naval Academy.
It looks like he was set back 20 years.
Yeah, I know. I get it.
Whatever. Like, in the context of this movie, it works.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things where it's like, nah, I'll suspend my disbelief.
Yeah, that's what you have to. I mean, again, I don't like to nitpick these kind of things. The movie exists in a universe that you're just going to have to, like, go along with, right? There's a funny thing where somebody asked Jack Quaid, they're like, did you ever think about like how you're actually Meg Ryan's son, so you would be really good for this? He's like, there was a moment where like I'm watching Top Gun Maverick and the picture of my mom shows up and I point at her like the Leonardo DiCaprio meme, you know, the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood meme.
Oh, I like that a lot.
Yeah. He's like, no, but he's like, Miles is great. It's, you know, whatever. But he's like, I don't think it should be a rule that if there's a fictional child of a real parent that their child, if they're an actor, should have to play them. I like this thing too. I like the setup of the mission. Again, we're dealing with, again, this is the thing where the ages are fudge because it's like he's in this meeting with Ham and, you know, Parnell, Warlock, and I forgot what Ham's name is even in the movie. I just think of him as John Hamm when I watch him in the movie.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, I'm like, they give it Sidewinder or something as like his calling because they talk about how he was like a number one in his class or whatever. But how old am I supposed to assume Tom Cruise's character is compared to these two guys? Like, is he the same age as John Hamm? Is he older? What about Charles Parnell?
I thought he was supposed to be older, and they actually kind of made John Hamm look a little bit older than like you can age John Hamm down a lot.
Yeah.
And they don't do that in this movie. He's got the gray hair a little bit.
Yeah. He's a great heavy in this, by the way. Great. He fills his role perfectly.
As I was saying before. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. He's just also another guy. He's just like got that chin, you know, where you're like, you know, either you're a superhero or you're a giant asshole. Like that's the only two things you can be with that chin. I love John Hamm. I think he's great. I think Charles Parnell is great in this.
Oh, me too.
Well.
Like I'm glad you mentioned him before because he's got like 5 lines in this movie, but he's like he sounds a lot like Dennis Haysbert, who has like the greatest voice. Okay, I'm glad you know who that is.
Yeah, of course, the president of the United States of America in 24.
Oh, that's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a long time ago. But I like that sort of screen presence that he has, and even though he's not in many scenes here, he does really well in the ones that he's in. He's just that's a face that you want in your movie.
He pops in the movie. He just pops in the movie. He's got one of those things where he doesn't need to say a lot. He kind of pops in the movie really, really well. And also, like, even though he's not, feels like he could be a character that carries over from the original movie. You know, like could have been another one of those pilots, and you wouldn't, you know, whatever.
Well, like everybody has history with Maverick in this movie, which is exactly how you'd want it, right? Everybody knows him by reputation. All of them kind of have worked with him to some extent, and I really like that. I mean, again, going back to what you were saying before, that's Tom Cruise, right? Like everybody in Hollywood has an opinion of Tom Cruise, and I'm sure a lot of them are not the nicest opinions, but you know, you don't like everyone has worked with him in some capacity or knows him in some capacity, and his reputation certainly precedes him. And
yeah. Also, the thing is, like,
a lot of
I don't really like the way the methods so much, but I can't disagree with the results. Like, that's kind of like the vibe of every movie that he's in at this point, you know? So we then kind of meet, right? We meet the crew, right? The new crew of people who are going to be there. And I think this is a fascinating scene just from like a construction perspective, because we obviously start with Maverick. We meet Jennifer Connelly, great pick to play opposite him. This movie, pointedly compared to the last movie, she's not trying to stop the movie from happening. You know, in the moment where Maverick has to go fly the flight, she's not like, no, you can't go. You said you were going to stay with me. You know, you can't do this. Like, you know, that, but whatever. She's very good. She's very charming. Again, that character doesn't have a lot to it, but she's able to sort of imbue it with stuff because she's such a good actress.
She's cool as hell.
She's very cool.
She has this like I said it in the last movie too. Like she has this kind of commanding presence that like you can put her on there with Tom Cruise and she holds her own in a lot of ways. Like because she's kind of the female equivalent of him. As like not in the personal life stuff, the off screen stuff, but she is like very beautiful, but also a very, very good actor. And this sort of like middle-aged romance thing that happens in this movie, like I'm down for it, right? Like I'm not sure if this movie necessarily needed it in every iteration that it had going forward, but like Pete and Penny works for me, I think, very, very well. Even the moment with her daughter where, you know, there's this like high school thing where he sleeps with her and the daughter comes home and like later on in the movie. And so he climbs out the window. She like makes him leave and then he's face to face with her. Like, I really like all of that stuff. And I like that we don't get, I mean, the yacht sequence is fantastic. The sailing sequence.
The sailing sequence. That whole sequence is basically like, hey, aren't Boats and Jennifer Connelly kind of awesome? Like that's what that whole scene is for. Yep. I'm like, yeah, I agree with you, movie. They are both kind of awesome, especially in this thing. Sorry, I cut you off though. What were you gonna say?
No, that's okay. I really like sort of all the ways that plays out, and I like what they don't show there as well. And like you said, like she doesn't stop the movie from happening. We don't see her in the climactic sequence of this, you know, listening in somehow, like she couldn't, right? And the movie is smart enough and knows enough, like we know she's there, we know he has something to go home to and something to care about, but we're not sort of like slamming it. And like, you know, they get together in the end, which I think is nice, and we get that flying sequence that kind of mirrors the sailing sequence. I love the sailing sequence because Maverick sucks at being a first mate, and like it's nice to see him like not be good at something, and she's kind of like calling all the shots, and you know, just a nice little moment. Beautiful looking in IMAX as well. Like it does everything that it needs to.
The boat sequence is another like very Kosinski looking sequence because it looks it looks much more like that kind of like beautifully clean frames, like commercial almost look to it. Like, you know, a commercial for a fucking watch, spotless, you know,
right? Like, you can eat off of any service. And like, I love nautical stuff. I love sailing, and I've gone out on boats like that. They are nowhere near in that good of condition.
Yeah, no,
like,
no.
People don't keep their boats like that. A boat is a thing that, you know, is destroyed every time you go out on the water. Hers is just, you know, it's exquisite the way Jennifer Connelly is exquisite.
Yeah, so and apparently only he's taking it because the motor in her airplane or whatever the hell she's talking, or her other boat.
Yeah, I can fix that for you.
Yeah, I can fix it.
Not like I have this world-ending potentially mission to go on and train these people for.
Yeah.
No, let's go sailing.
Like,
it's not a thing you can do for like 20 minutes. It's like a whole day.
I do like, for me, like the only part of this that's kind of I like stuff with the daughter is a little bit like don't hurt her this time, man, or whatever. Like that kind of stuff for me. I'm like, okay, like I get it. I don't hate it. I'll say it's not like the thing. So like I was talking about Only the Brave last week, where I was like, I cannot stand this shit that they're doing with her character. That stuff, I don't hate it, but I'm just kind of like, I don't need this. If that scene had just been a look, like if she just looked at him and he was just kind of like,
oh, agreed.
You know, we don't need the line.
The line of dialogue there is, and the actress isn't bad. And
no,
Tom Cruise
she's not
pretty good
at all.
in that moment also. Like the look of horror on his face when they are eye to eye is kind of beautiful. I mean, I really don't like sitcom stuff. I mentioned that one sequence in Only the Brave,
which I loved,
the baby having a fever, which you loved. So I if you were on board for that, I can't believe you're not on board for this. But
no, because that's not fun. That's funny. This isn't funny. This isn't a bit. I like bits in movies. Like I like when two characters do little bits with each other. This isn't a bit. This is just like you know, something that has been in a million movies about sort of like a guy who's sort of like a, you know, tough to pin down, who hurt somebody, and they have a kid, and the kid's wise beyond her years or whatever, that kind of thing. I felt they did a good job with the kid not being that for most of it, and that scene was kind of veering a little too far into that. Something this is one of the things I really like is that when he shows up at the bar the next day to pay off the tab, and he doesn't see her at first, and she goes, "Hey, what's up, Mav?" I just like that. Like it's like, okay, she knows this guy, right? She has experience with this guy. She knows him. She doesn't dislike him. She doesn't say it meanly, right? She says it kind of nicely to him, and she shares that look with her mom when like he kind of leaves, and they're like, she's like, "Oh, are you gonna do this?" And she's like, "Maybe I'll do this." And like, it's not like a judgy, kind of mean thing. I like how they play her for a lot of the other parts. A lot of that is the acting, right? It's not really what's in the script, but I like that stuff.
Yeah, and I also like that the prior history between the two of these characters is basically not even touched. Like, we just assume he's the kind of guy that he is, and like she's a perfect foil for him. There's not much, and I like that. We don't need it. We can kind of fill in the blanks by ourselves, and a stupider, lesser movie would have just given it to you all up front, because like the two of them could make it convincing, but it's just so extraneous and unnecessary, and they could do it with a look, like you said before. So and they do a lot.
And I think part of it too, and this is sort of I think the more cynical part of me, is like the reason they don't go too far into it is because even though obviously she's not Kelly McGillis from the first Top Gun, if you can sort of just like picture in your mind, like this sort of is that character, like it's a different person, but it looked movie ready, in 2018, Kelly McGillis that was like, they didn't ask me, I'm 8 years old.
Did she actually say that? Because I couldn't find that.
Yeah,
okay.
She was like, I'm old, I'm fat. She's like, this is what she said, basically, She's like, they're not gonna put me in a movie. My thing is like, just mention her. Like, like just mention the character. Because she's a big part of both the romantic and sort of like the goings on of that movie in so many ways,
I mean, the only way, like, I was kind of offended the first time I saw it that she's not right. Like, if she wasn't ready to be in the movie, fine, and she probably didn't want to do it. And
she said she would have done it, but they were never going to put her in a movie. She said, I don't, basically.
Like, I think the only thing, kind of seeing it a second time, especially, like, that tells you something about Maverick, right? Like, she was one of many. Like, although that romance was so central to that movie, like, it was her, and then it was Jennifer Connelly's character in this, and there was probably a half dozen in between, in those intervening years there, and that makes sense for Maverick. So it does. Not bad.
But again, this points to the idea of where, like, I don't really feel like this guy was the guy in the first Top Gun. It's 30 years later. There's a whole ton of time for somebody to change and grow. But I do feel a little bit like they were just like, let's just sort of make him like modern Tom Cruise actor persona and not worry about making it too much like Maverick in, the original movie. Because he has no horniness really left in him. Like, as far as like, I don't believe this guy has slept with another person before Penny in 20 years, but the way he acts, in the movie up until that point. Again, I don't need it to be there, but I just, comparing it to the original movie, that's sort of, I think there's a little bit of like a gap in between what that is and what this is. But we meet all the people. So I do like this scene. I like that it's shot like Maverick as the outsider, not really saying anything, right? Just watching people show up and being like, okay. And almost like he's Kelly McGillis, right, from the first movie, where like all the like the young like hot shots are coming in who are all cocky, and he's sort of there. And even there's like Glenn Powell, more to my idea that Glenn Powell is like the Maverick of this movie, right? He kind of has like the embarrassing interaction with his teacher, right? That's going to show up because he has the moment in the next scene where he sort of looks back at him walking down the aisleway, just like Tom has in the first movie where he sees Kelly McGillis walking down the aisleway and kind of like rolls his eyes and is like, oh shit, like I fucked with the teacher or whatever. And that's in this moment. But you get Glenn Powell. And what I like about the economics of this is you kind of get the idea of the people who are going to be important, right? Bob, Phoenix, Hangman, Rooster. You kind of get their whole vibe very quickly, right? Like you get,
absolutely.
You know who they are very fast, very economically, right? To the point that like, you know who Hangman is, not only by his actions, but by how the other people react to him, right? So same thing with Rooster. You get there, the Rooster is like a good guy, right? And that there feels like there might have been something between Phoenix and him at some point, the way they kind of like act with each other, their first sort of like hello. It's never spelled out, but like I like that you get that there seems to be a history between this group of people that is here. You said you wanted to bring up why you liked the Great Balls of Fire thing so much.
Did I?
Yeah. I was like, I think it's a little crazy that they play that song, and you were like, I think it's actually good, and I'm going to talk about it when it comes up.
I just for like nostalgia purposes, right? Like I do think things have a way of coming back. Every day of my life, right? I'm working with people of that age who are kind of like they've got their own culture, they've got their own music and films and literature and things like that, and yet like it's weird how things kind of have this resonance and like it's a kitschy sort of thing. Like sometimes those things and now what's happening, which makes me feel very old, is a lot of it's like stuff that I listened to and was modern and current at the time when I was a kid. Like Blink 182 and things like that. And I do think like there is this way that these Great Balls of Fire is a great song, right? It's the perfect thing. Like you can just bang the keys of the piano and play that song. And like, do they give a shit about Jerry Lee Lewis? Like that's who it was, right?
Yeah, Jerry Lee Lewis. Yeah, of course.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So like, I'm sure that they probably don't even know who that was. And yet it's this song that just kind of gets people fired up. And it's like a thing that you can play pretty energetically and easily. Like it doesn't require a lot of, finger dexterity on the piano, but it's like a rousing sort of bar song. And, for those of us who've seen it, and the movie it gives us, we see a little bit of that. Like, don't we flash back for a second there? Like, in this moment when he's looking in the window, we do see a clip from the original movie, which I think is there. It serves two purposes, right? It's there for the new audience to be like, okay, this is an important thing. This was a moment. This was like one of those memorable things in the original film, but also it works kind of for this scene where we see Maverick in this vulnerable moment where he's remembering, his best friend, his wingman, who he was unable to save and all that stuff. Like it's really nice. And I do think, I don't know, like, I believed Great Balls of Fire in this scene. And the idea that you would, and maybe I'm reading way too much into it because I tend to do this with everything, and particularly like familial relationships, right? Like the idea that Rooster's son would sort of grow up like having this song, like the memory of his father and this thing that was so closely tied to his father. So he probably introduced all of them to this song, right? Played it at the bar one night and, got everybody fired up, like I was saying. And now it's like his thing, and they don't understand why it's so meaningful to him, but like they like him. So they kind of go along with it. And I just thought that was a nice choice because they didn't need to do that. And I think you show him singing a song and playing the piano, you show that clip from the original movie, it could be anything, but I think it's just kind of a nice synergy that it has, and I buy it. I like it for his character.
It's definitely meant to orient you to be like, this little boy is this now grown man, who used to be singing the piano is now playing the piano, right? And you just have to accept, and this is way with all sequels, right? That these moments you saw in the original movie are each one of them is a watershed moment to the people who lived in the characters who lived in the movie, right? So this one time, maybe he only played one time, this Great Balls of Fire, or whatever, but because it happened there right before he died, it's like, it's a super important moment, right? And so it was an imprinted moment on Rooster, so that's why he's doing it here. And you're absolutely right. Like, it could be a thing where he went to this school. He went to Top Gun. He obviously went to this bar a lot because they know who he is. So he's probably done this, 20 times or whatever, at least playing this song in the bar. So totally. Also, it calls back not only to that moment in the first movie, but also the, you've lost that loving feeling moment in the first movie.
I was a little surprised that didn't show up.
Me too.
At some point in this one. Yeah.
That would have been crazy though. If that had been, if any other character except Tom Cruise's character had done it, that would have been crazy. And then we're basically into all of like after the scene, Maverick kind of shows up. He throws the book in the garbage.
Oh, I got to talk about this. Made me laugh so much. It didn't register with me the first time. So yeah, it's that typical rebellious teacher thing. He brings in the F-18 manual and he says, I'll bet you all know this, like cover to cover or whatever. And Glenn Powell's character is like, yeah, we do, whatever. And then of course, what he's going to do is throw the book out, right? And literally he's on this podium, they're in a hangar, he's talking to the class, he's talking to the pilot trainees, and there's a garbage can right there, right? There's a wastebasket right next to him. Why would that be there? Right. Why would that be there for any other reason than like so he could throw the book in it, right?
Course.
Like it's such a movie thing and it's such a Hollywood contrivance, and it just, you know, this movie works so well that it didn't even register with me the first time, and the second time it was just like, yeah, it's like a Key and Peele thing or something like that, right? Like it's so obvious, like. I don't know. And it's such a minor detail, but it's just one of those things. I guess on a second viewing, it really just sort of resonates with me. Like, you know, clearly there's no reason for that to be there, but it's such a cool moment and you have to have it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's going to happen in a movie like this. It's one of those other ones where I'm just like, okay, like we're just playing the hits a little bit here. Those moments where I'm like, where the sort of propulsiveness of the movie, there's a little crack in it for me. And I'm like, okay, that's when I start to see like the little holes that I think,
and that's what I was saying before. Like the first 30 minutes, you don't get much of that at all, and everything up through the scene at the hard deck, I think works pretty much perfectly and is exactly what I want it to be. And this is where, you know, and it's little things like that, right? And this movie never goes so far in that direction where it's like, okay, I remember even we'll get to it, but the final sequence when it's Maverick and I almost called him Goose, Rooster. You know, in the F-14, I mean, it's beyond contrived. It's ridiculous. The most preposterous way they could have possibly ended this movie. But everything up until that point has kind of set you up for it. And something like that needs to happen. And although, you know, my logical brain is saying no, the rest of me, my heart is still in it. And I want to see these characters together. We'll get to.
You got to have an F-14 in a Top Gun movie. You can't not have an F-14 in a Top Gun movie. That's just like insanity.
They do. They set it up. I think it's this sequence or the next one where they set it up like, oh, they've got this arsenal of fighters. They've got all the new stuff, and then they've even got a few leftover planes. This line that's like, why is that there?
Yeah.
Like, oh, right. Yeah.
We need an F-14. So, you know, we get this scene right where we set it up, and then we're kind of. This is what I like is that they do a lot of these scenes where they go right in. They're kind of placing action underneath or over like the sort of scene we're seeing, right? So we're not even done with him laying out the stakes of the mission before we're already seeing people get into airplanes and like start the sort of like business of let's get up in these airplanes and let's do these things.
I love these competition training sequences so much. I loved them the first time I saw it. They worked even better the second time. The editing in this movie is incredible. Eddie Hamilton is the editor. Nominated for an Academy Award. That was not what this film won for, but like it's this whip crack editing. The music, the sound design of it is perfect. I mean, these are as exhilarating of sequences like this as you'll ever see in any movie. And the way the pacing of it, like Kosinski's been good at this, right? But he's never like, I think the action scenes in this are so far beyond anything he's done. Like he's a good action director. There's some fun moments in Tron. There's some fun moments in Oblivion. The firefighting stuff and Only the Brave is great. But like when we actually see him direct an action sequence in this, I mean, he's so good at it. And I think he's got a perfect editor. Like the pacing of these could not be better, where they're, you know, they're the thing where Maverick's flying with them and he's, you know, fake shooting them down, that kind of thing. And then we cut right back to the training room. Like, why'd you fuck up? You know, what'd you do wrong there?
Why are you dead?
Like, why are you dead? Yeah, exactly. Better way of saying it too. I could watch that. Like if those went on for hours, I'd be totally into it. Like they are so much fun. They're perfect. As you said, it really nicely sets up who these characters are. It really nicely does what we were saying before, where it sets up how the mission's going to work later on in the film and what the dangers are and what they actually have to do. I love these sequences so much. They are like every Fast and Furious, I'm sorry to bring them up again. I know we talked about them last week too, but like they are straining so hard to get just one sequence that's as good as this, and none of them do it. And these are just like, it's perfect action. It's just, it's perfect. As I don't use that word a lot, but it's perfect.
You talk about the leap. I think so much has to do with how involved Cruise is in designing these action sequences. Like I don't want to take it away from Kosinski completely, but there's a clear level up between what we've seen the editing is great. The editing is amazing. But I'm just going to say,
I'm not putting this all on Kosinski, but I will say, like, you know, if I was a little unsure of certain of his abilities up till this point, like this sequence tells me, you know, this is the guy for this.
Like I'm fascinated to see when F1 eventually comes out, what those action sequences are like, you know, when it's kind of all him on charge again. Because Pitt isn't known to be someone who gets involved in that way with this kind of stuff. So I'm very fascinated to see. Again, I would rather not, you know, Phoenix be like, and now you know something about Rooster. Because like he kind of sacrificed himself and did the right thing. I'm like, I got it anyway. You know, you don't have to tell me to get it. I get it. Hangman is obviously clearly like almost a
Hangman leaves everyone hanging.
Yeah, he's almost like a cartoon at this point, right? He's just like, oh, who cares about them? They can't keep up with me. I'm going. You know, so like that. Yeah, we're really getting broad strokes up. That's fine. This is a broad strokes movie. Got to be in the world of the movie, right? And this is the movie that they're giving us. I was like,
little minor detail. I love the artwork on their helmets, particularly Hangman's with the A's missing. It's like the game Hangman. Just fantastic. It's little thing. Nobody needs that. This movie works without that, but I love it. I guess the actors were allowed to come up with their own call signs. So that was kind of cool as well. And just, it's those little details. Like Kosinski is such an aesthetics guy. And, you know, we talked about the Maverick's amazing hangar home that he has and the decommissioned hangar. I love those kinds of things. And particularly on a second viewing, those are the things that really stick with me.
Yeah. So this whole, again, so we're introduced to the ticking clock. We've got a couple of these amazing aerial sequences, right? And some crazy flying. And what I think is fascinating about this, right? And again, even speaking in the text of the movie and also a metatextual way, the stakes are very high, right? Of this movie, like we talked about before, the stakes of the first movie are not incredibly high. It really feels like they were like, if we're going to make another Top Gun movie, it can't just be
who's going to be the best of the best.
Yeah, we can't just do a repeat of the first movie again. We can't.
At least in this case, being the best of the best means you can complete this basically impossible mission.
Yeah, it's not like, oh, you graduate first in your class or whatever. You know, so it's got to be like an actual like high stakes mission that we're going on. And apparently, Kosinski said that they asked real pilots, Air Force and Navy pilots, if you could design the hardest mission you could possibly think of, what would it be? And he goes, basically, they gave us this mission, essentially.
Okay.
Like, and the only thing we took out that it wasn't here is that they said it would be at night, essentially. But they're like, we're not going to shoot this at night. Essentially, we're not going to shoot it in the dark. So it's not going to be that. But everything else is pretty much what they laid out for him. And so that's how it's put together. And I think we talked about all this process stuff, I think is really, really great. I think though the next really big meaty scene we talk about is the Val Kilmer scene, right? That's like the next really big like scene we need to talk about.
Yeah, we're skipping ahead a little bit there.
Well, we talked about Connolly stuff. What were we going to say?
The football sequence, is that before that or after that?
Is that before? That's got to be after that, because right after that he gets sort of like, is when he does like the Hail Mary, I'm going to complete the mission run. So yeah, the football sequence, right? The football sequence, yes. Obviously a mirror of the volleyball sequence in the original Top Gun, which is another one of those like big iconic moments that everybody remembers. There's this insane fake football game they created, dogfight football.
Is it fake?
Yes. Kosinski said Aaron Kruger created it, basically.
What?
Yes.
I thought that was one of those like military things, like they got that from like some, real hard asses that had been in there a long time. Oh, we play offense and defense at the same time. Dogfight football is like, oh man, like that had to be a real thing.
No, it's way too corny to be a real military thing. That's a screenwriter thing I've ever heard it.
No, like they don't really get into the specifics of the game at all. And then finally it's like, we're not even keeping score anymore. Yeah. But like I remember seeing that the first time and it was like ridiculous. And then he says that, oh, it's dogfight football. And like maybe it's just Tom Cruise, as authoritative as he is. It's like, oh yeah, that's probably a real thing. That was a cool idea that somebody threw in. I did not know that was an Aaron Kruger creation.
Yeah, it's an Aaron Kruger creation.
Still more believable than anything in Scream 3.
Yes, absolutely. We got a One Republic song playing during this. Mm-hmm. It's definitely a fun scene, and it's a good sort of audience palate cleanser in between these big, huge, real, intense action scenes that we're getting. Right.
I read a review that said, I don't know if they were necessarily complaining about this, but they said the homoeroticism is so far dialed down in Top Gun Maverick as opposed to the original Top Gun. And like, this is like the one nod toward that, right? Like sweaty, shirtless dudes. And there's women in this one too, which is, a kind of a nice progressive 2022 or 2019, 2022.
Well, there's a woman in it. Women is...
There's two. There's two female pilots. I believe they're both in this sequence. I don't know.
The other one I don't think has a line, basically.
No. I didn't say it was perfect. I'm just saying they're trying.
Yeah.
But I do think, this scene it's kind of a fun nod to that.
Yes.
And everyone's looking for that. Again, as I said, a friend of my wife's bought her the original movie because she had never seen it. It's like, oh yeah, I don't know if you're going to care about the Navy flying stuff, but there's sweaty shirtless dudes and a volleyball sequence, and you got to see that. It's like of a certain age, right? If you're female, it's kind of a rite of passage like this, the way it was a rite of passage for us as well, the original movie. So I like that they did something, I think it's a nice moment that does.
Miles Teller does his little like shimmy thing, which broke the internet for a little while. His little shirtless shimmy he does.
I love the bit in the scene. I mean, it's probably too early in the film to have this, but Maverick's on the ground and Rooster just kind of goes over and like lends him his hand, picks him up a little bit. Like, that's nice.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole point of the scene, right? Is like they're team building, right? These are, let's take away all this like angry competition and let's just have these guys kind of bond. And he says that to John Hamm. I really like that shot where he's like, he goes and puts his shirt on and sits on the chair and the shadow comes over his face and it's Hamm sitting there just blocking out the sun.
When Hamm walks away, that this sort of self-satisfied Cruise look with he's really good at that stuff.
Yeah, he's great at that. So that seems a lot of
Tom
fun.
Cruise does self-satisfied extremely.
Yeah, and then that's when him and Jennifer Connelly get together and they sleep together, and that's when we talked about that other scene where he hops out the window. I'm gonna say it. I like when people kiss in movies. I like when there's romance in movies, and it's nice that it's in this movie. It's nice that's an element of it. Even if I don't think it's the most fleshed out part of the movie, I do enjoy that it's in the movie. And I do like that moment where he's like, I'm never leaving you again. And she's like, oh, shut up. And like pushes him out I think that's a good moment from her. Good acting moment from Connelly there. Then we get to the Kilmer scene, right? Which I think is the thing that really is the key to this movie truly working as well as it does is this scene. Because first of all, we talked about Cruise and sort of sometimes his limitations, sometimes when he's good. I think he is so good in this scene with Kilmer because they've said that there were different variations where Kilmer would talk more, even though it was like, that he talked through the entire scene, even though it was, very difficult for him to talk. People don't know Val Kilmer had throat cancer in real life and isn't really able to talk normally anymore. He's the one who came up with the idea of his character being sick in the movie so that he could play it this way. And that kind of got the emotional element got added like much later in the process, this sort of like emotional spine with Iceman.
It's such a great idea and it's such a great scene, right? Like, because one of the themes of Top Gun Maverick is about getting older and kind of the world moving on. And, we see a number of times throughout this, that photo, right, of Maverick and Iceman, like just the handsomest, most badass looking dudes ever from that original movie. And it's in this sequence too. And the thought that like Maverick is basically still that guy that he was. And here is Iceman, like a couple days away in the film from dying. And, and this infirm sort of state, although he's the one pulling the strings behind this entire thing, which we haven't mentioned yet. Also an interesting idea, right? Like he is the reason why Maverick essentially gets this last ditch job. And, he's the one that still believes in him, right? Because he flew with him and he knew, what he was when he was going to be something that he never really turned out to be. And, just the weight of years in this scene and like, I didn't know much about Val Kilmer at the time. And I was like, oh man, like, is he actually dying? And he's still with us, I think. But like, in the context of this scene, it was just something about that and just sort of seeing him in that state and, knowing what Iceman was in that original, cause like, that's one of the things, like, I agree that this is absolutely key to the entire thing, but like, this is one of those scenes that I feel like someone seeing this movie and not having familiarity with the original, not having grown up with the original, and maybe not ever having seen Val Kilmer in a movie before, because it's been a while since he had a starring role, like he had there. Probably doesn't work for those viewers, but for us, this scene just hits like a ton of bricks.
See, I think the thing you're pointing out, I think is something that you're presupposing because you have such a familiarity with the original movie. Like, I just think it's a good scene. The reason it works so well for me is it's not heavily trading on their relationship from the first movie. I think it's played so well by Cruise, the entire scene. Like his emotion during this scene is so forefronted and the fact that it's so quiet from the other side that he's almost playing off just reactions and sort of gestures from Kilmer for most of it.
Well, the reverse shot between Tom Cruise and words typed on a screen, like that's hard, right? Like we have not given Joseph Kosinski enough credit for stuff like that, right? I mean, there's some moments in Only the Brave that are like that too, but it's the quiet stuff, it's the character moments, the sort of those kinds of things where it's just two actors in a room and we don't have the swelling strings on the soundtrack, but it's just like regular, real people having a sensitive interaction. He's actually very good at that stuff. There's a couple moments like this is the best one in this movie, obviously, but there's even some of the stuff with him and Connolly is like that as well. And I think, that's a big, we're giving Tom Cruise a lot of credit for it, but like that's what directors do, right? Like a big part of directing is just like putting the actors in the right place and knowing like the rhythm of a scene and those kinds of things. And yes, Tom Cruise is very good. Yes, Val Kilmer's very good, but you do need a good director to sort of shepherd that. And I think he does that very well. But I mean, you're right. But I do think like, again, it's that 8 versus 10 thing, right? Like this is a very good scene. It's well acted. It's well directed. It really kind of hits at the moment in the story when it needs to. But for me, the dimension that is added by having seen that first film, knowing what that photo represents, knowing that these two guys like really kind of hated each other through most of that movie and came to this like wonderful brotherhood and mutual respect there. And now, when they hug and like, this is one of those, like Field of Dreams. Like there's certain things in movies that Talk to Me, Goose, as I mentioned before, like whatever you are, whatever kind of macho dude you are, those are things that are going to make you cry. And this is one, like add this to the list.
Doing this series so far with you, it has definitely shown me that there are certain things like this that you definitely have a stronger connection to than I do. This sort of like we are men, but we love each other. Like it seems to be something that you really respond to, which is totally fine. I get it. And that's not an insult.
I guess I do.
That's not an insult at all. I mean that. I don't mean that. I mean that nicely and kindly.
No. You're right though. I mean, I do like brotherhood. Like I'm an only child, so I don't have any actual brothers. So this sort of like found brotherhood and father-son stuff. Yeah. Male bonding stuff. It works for me probably better than it does for most viewers, but man, these two guys hugging each other in this scene, especially the first time I saw it, not knowing Val Kilmer's situation, like I kind of thought this was for sure going to be his last movie. And like he campaigned for this role. Cruise said he wouldn't make the movie without him. And just seeing them embrace in this scene. Yeah, I was pretty misty in that theater.
The ideas that really got to me in this scene are this super confident guy who is so good at the thing he's good at, right? But is terrible at this other thing and has always been terrible at this other thing. And just talking to his friend about like what he's scared of, I think is just on the base construction of the scene, forgetting about the first movie is the thing I really respond to here. There are a couple just reaction shots from Cruise. I've seen this movie. This is the third time I've seen this movie. And I don't think that in either one of the first two times I appreciated his performance in the movie to the extent I appreciated it this time. I think that I kind of was like, oh, he's doing the Tom Cruise thing. And from seconds, he is doing the Tom Cruise thing, which I think is great. I don't get super impressed by because it's just like a thing he's so good at doing. And I know he's good at doing it. But moments like this, where he's really playing the emotional reality of a small scene, which we don't get to see very often, is the thing for me that I really, really enjoyed and really responded to in the scene. And it is so effective when the Kilmer finally talks. The fact that they held it back for that long, it really hits home when he talks. And the fact that they ended with that joke, I think, is the perfect like end note, grace note to the scene.
Yeah. Who do you think's the better pilot now? Yeah, I love it.
And Cruise reacting to it. That's one of the only times where he feels like Maverick from the first movie, where he's like, let's keep this a nice, happy conversation or whatever. Like that's a really nice moment between the two of them. And what I love is just two guys. Kilmer, obviously not anymore. It's been a long time. At one point, one of the biggest movie stars on the planet, right? One of the most famous movie actors in the business. They both have done a ton of movies. They're both just good at being on camera. They don't know how to react and show and be in the camera. And they're just two people who are that good at doing the thing that they do together in a scene is just always a wonderful thing. So there's that scene. Then he basically kind of like dies like almost a couple of scenes later, I think, basically, right?
Yeah, and it's like right in the middle of a heated scene, I believe, between Rooster and Maverick, where Charles Parnell walks in and is like, Maverick, we got to talk kind of thing. And we sort of know something like that happens. Iceman's funeral is great. Really, another really stirring moment. The 21 gun salute and the flyover.
Yeah, and I like that one of these things, I feel like it's specific. I don't know what it is, but when like Maverick takes off like the wings and he like punches it into the casket.
He pins it right, because that's what you do to a new recruit, right?
I thought that was great. A great little moment. Around these two scenes, right? We've got the sort of really the first confrontation between Maverick and Rooster, where they're really sort of like talking about what's going on, and is maybe the 7th time we've heard him say, someone say about pulling the papers.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, do we know? Oh, we established the fact that he pulled his papers. I know it's a big deal. This is one of the things where like, I like them together in scenes, and I believe in the like underlying emotional truth of their argument. But these are just classic scenes between two people who, if one of them would just tell the other person the whole truth about what happened, the whole fight would be over.
Sure.
You know? And I understand like Cruz has that good, reasoning, like, I don't want him to resent his mom as well.
Yeah, he's always going to resent me. Why does he have to resent his mother?
But by the end of the movie, he doesn't resent him anymore. He loves him to death. So like that, they kind of like undercut their own thing in that. It's just kind of a convenient reason to keep the drama going. So this is one of the things in the movie that even though I like both the performances and I like the idea of the conflict, it's one of the weaker parts of the movie to me, because I just don't feel like any of the dialogue scenes really push that story forward. The action scenes do, and I think that's really good. Like I really like that moment near the end where he's like, "Talk to me, Dad," and you cut right to Maverick sort of talking. Yep. And it's like, oh, so Maverick is like his dad. Like it's not a subtle thing, but I like that moment, right? Because it tells a story through like action.
I do too, but it's another one of those things where you can really feel the screenwriters.
Yeah, like, definitely.
The hand of them is very heavy in that moment. And look, talk to me, Goose. I've said it so many times. One of my favorite moments in that movie, and one of those things that gets me every time. I think it was a little much here. There are, even in the Iceman scene, there are a couple that like the production design, the office that he's sitting in, he's surrounded by planes, model planes, and like pictures of himself young, and it's a little too much. But I don't know. I mean, this is a pretty earnest movie, so I guess earnest. What I always say, it's my philosophy of movies, right? If you're gonna do it, go all the way with it, right? Like do something that is gonna be like the best version or the biggest, most sort of dramatic version of whatever it is that you're doing. But I like subtlety too, and sometimes you like. I think the Maverick Rooster stuff would be better if, like you said, if they could have scaled it back a little bit and kind of trusted the audience a little bit to sort of see why these two characters, like, just the fact that it gets mentioned as many times as it does. And like, I don't necessarily believe, because Rooster is so good and because these are military people and, they are supposed to kind of distance themselves from emotion to some degree, not completely, but it's like, so you can see the cracks in it a little bit. But I think it would be nice if it wasn't just so upfront all the time about like what this, this contentiousness between the two of them is. And we could just kind of say, like, if it was just all in the action sequences and there was less of this dialogue stuff and these sort of emotive acting, like neither one of them is bad. But I do think, it's a card they play a few too many times. And it does set up that sort of problematic final sequence that we sort of need to have. But I don't know. I think we would have gotten it. I think the audience would have enough investment in their relationship and understand their relationship. I mean, like it's pretty late in the movie when he finally, I believe it's he's with Jennifer Penny. He's with her and she asks, why'd you pull his papers? And he kind of tells her the story, and it's like right before the climax of the movie, like before they go out on the mission. So I kind of, like, if that was like, that scene would be more powerful if we hadn't seen everything sort of leading up to it with Maverick and Rooster. A couple of looks here and there, a little bit of, when he makes him do push-ups, when he washes out in the training mission, like that's all I need. I think that's all the movie needs.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. And I think that, there are these moments along the way where, like you said, if you take one of the mentions out, if you take one of the fights out, I think they all work a little better. But there's this whole prevailing thing where like, I'm like, would these guys really, again, suspending disbelief in the movie, but there's like, would these guys really just like yell at their commanding officer like before they get on the plane? Like they're military pilots. I'm like, is the designation to be a Navy pilot that you just don't follow orders ever. Like that's like nobody follows orders.
Well, not if you're a Maverick.
Yeah, but none of them follow orders. All
Yeah,
of
no,
them.
you're right.
That's what I'm saying. It's not just him. It's like all of them are like disobey orders at some point or another in the thing. But yeah,
but that's what the Top Gun franchise is all about. It's about disobeying orders, being a Maverick. It's called Top Gun Maverick. You know, that's it's this sort of like confidence in yourself and this like this disdain for sort of official people and John Hamm embodies that in this movie.
Well, I think because I think some of that is born right out of the Tony Scott movie, right? Because I think both the Scott brothers in all of their films, they all sort of have a constant distaste for authority and for rich people. Like they hate those two kinds of people, and all of their movies have disdain for them. Even though Tony's much more of like a more nakedly populist filmmaker than I think Ridley is, obviously that still exists in both of their films all over the place.
Ironically, because they're given like millions and millions of dollars and all this access to
but I think that military comes a lot along. What I read was that it comes along with like they're both British, right? And in England the kind of like class system is much more ingrained, right, than it is in America. And it's like if you they both were born poor, so it's like no matter how much money they get, they still have that, like the rich people suck and I hate them, and like that's sort of like a big part of I think what it fed into that original movie, and it's in this movie in some places as well. But so Hamm Kilmer's dead. Hamm wastes no time in being like, the person protecting you is gone, even though we're a week away from this mission being ready to go, and you've been training the whole time. You're out. I'm in. Like, and he does say that line, which I think is good, where he's like, but all you've done so far is prove to them that they cannot do it, basically, that it cannot be flown. Like, you've not, there's been no step along the way that. I
love the turn that Hamm does in this scene, like leading up to that, right? Where it's, he's expressing his condolences and his sympathy about Iceman to Maverick. And it's like, oh, this guy actually does have a heart. He is human. And then like, it's just like flipping a switch and then he's a dick again. Like worse than ever before. I was like, nice, John Hamm.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so he takes over and then we get that great scene where, which you've got to have, right? Which is, even though this whole movie has been, again, in a metatextual way, been like, no, Tom, your time is done. You're going to show these younger people how to be the stars of this movie. In the end, it's Tom's going to be the star of the movie, right? So Tom's going to go on the mission, right? So he's
and a lot of the ideas for this film before they got to the Kosinski stuff was like Maverick's going to be a supporting role, right? He is going to be the trainer. He is going to be the boss in some sense. He's going to be the coach rather than the player.
Yeah.
And I think from the opening frames, before we even see his character, we know that this is going to happen at some point. Although I like the way it happens. I think it's a good scene.
Yeah, me too. It's a great scene.
Particularly when he does the thing that he does at the beginning of the movie, right? Like it's that's so Maverick to just go out and steal essentially this plane, fly the mission, do it better than anybody else possibly could. All right, cool. You're team leader now, old man.
Yeah. And I loved all of that. That scene is great. And in the theater, that scene played like fucking gangbusters, right? Everyone's like cheering and it's a great scene. You're reacting the way the people, like the cadets, like listening and watching are reacting to it. I think all that works so well. You have that.
I love, so they have the mock target set up where it's just a box in the middle of the field, and they don't even have the box. Like they don't have time to move it out for Maverick to do this. And so he just like fires a missile into the ground, and it is that like stand up and cheer moment. It's like, well, that probably cost a lot. Didn't it?
Exactly. They shoot this missile
both in the world of the film and
well, because
in real life.
Again, talking about this again, you're on the world of the film. The next scene with Hamm and Charles Parnell doing their, like, he's like, I gotta make a choice between
I can court martial you basically, or make you team leader.
Yeah, basically. Which of course the only two options. And
not like a strongly worded letter and like go back to training.
Either you're gonna
That'd
leave
be a
the
fun fun climax for the movie is the strongly worded letter about Maverick.
Yeah, and then there's these other things that Cruise again I think is so good at. Is that moment where he's like, I'll make you team leader. And then when he's gonna say something, but he doesn't know what, he's kind of nervous and doesn't know what to say. And when Charles Brown was like, I think the admiral is asking a rhetorical question or whatever. But the way that Cruise responds, he's got that like, I want to say something because I'm Tom Cruise. I gotta talk. Like I got a man situation. I like that scene a lot. And then basically on the mission, right? We get the scene with Penny, the kind of wordless scene with Penny, and then, he picks his team, and this is where he's like, Glenn Powell, too much of a movie star. You're staying back. You're coming with me, Miles Teller. And then they go on their mission together.
Like, are we supposed to be surprised that he picks Rooster to be his wingman?
No, of course not. But again, it's like one of those things where I feel like the movie has done a very good job, like you talked about setting the stakes, right? So we saw that the blind shot doesn't work. So that they're going to have to do the blind shot in the actual mission, and it's going to work, right? It's just like all of these things are going to... There shouldn't be any fighters coming to get you at the beginning. Of course, there are going to be fighters when they're going to
those laser targeting things. Like they seem to work all the time, except for when they need them not to work.
Exactly.
You would think that'd be a pretty finely honed piece of equipment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, it doesn't work. This is one of those times it doesn't work.
Poor Bob.
Yeah, poor Bob. I think all that stuff is like it's just a payoff, right? It's just like it's coming, but it feels good when it happens because. You want it to happen. You want Rooster to be there, right? Just like, Rooster is not going to fuck it up. He's not going to fly too slow the whole time and not make it, right? So, but when he kicks into high gear, you're like, all right, like he's got it now, I like that a lot, right? And
I will say this, like one thing that like the whole third act of this movie, like I never felt any thought the first time I saw it or the second time, obviously, which I kind of knew what was going to happen. The danger for the other characters aside from Maverick is kind of not there. Yeah. Like we know if Rooster dies, then we're just ripping the first movie, right? Yeah. Like,
but Bob and Phoenix could have died.
Negates everything.
Bob and Phoenix could have died, or like one of the other, the other wingmen, basically.
See, but like that wouldn't have been a strong enough moment. Rooster would have been too much of a retread and would have negated like literally everything the plot did up to that point and the relationship between him and Maverick. So I guess I went into it thinking Maverick could maybe die here,
totally,
but nobody else is. Like they're accomplishing this mission, they're going to complete it, and everybody's going to get home safely. Maverick's maybe going to sacrifice himself, which he tries to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I like when he's yelling at him. He's like, what do you think the point of me was taking the missile just for you to come back and die? Like, that's not the point of this. I like that a lot. But no, I think the whole point is like, okay, what in the mission is going to go wrong? What's going to go unexpectedly? And how are they going to fix it? Like, that's the joy of these kind of action sequences. It's not really, I think that sometimes too much is made of characters dying in movies and in scenes as a stake. I feel like sometimes it's used as a cheap way to show that something has stakes, that a character dies in it. You know what 100%. I mean?
But if you don't have like at least some sense that could happen, then it kind of deflates the tension a little bit.
But I believe Maverick could die. Like I thought that was a possibility. The Tom Cruise.
Oh no, Maverick for sure. Yeah. But it's like he's old. Like he's lived a life. So if he dies,
he's only like 56. He's 90.
Well, I know, but he's
lived a long life
beyond his time. He outlived Iceman at this point. I will say there's some great stuff in this scene. So, like, Rooster is kind of the one that is not unsuccessful as the mission kind of kicks off, but like with this canyon run thing that they're doing, he's the one that falls behind. And there's these great moments where, so they're flying through this canyon, there's surface to air missiles. Mm-hmm. Sam's kind of positioned along the canyon, which seems not like this whole thing is would any actual real world
I don't know. They said they talked to a lot of military people about this kind of thing, and that's kind of like
maybe, I don't know, it seemed very video gamey to me. But like they're flying low through the canyon and he's kind of looking up at these looming missiles kind of like pointed at the sky above him, and he kind of like freezes up a little bit in the moment or something like that, and it's like that's cool. Like this movie, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but the way pilots sort of look at stuff that they probably shouldn't be looking at because they're flying at like ungodly speeds. I'm just kind of like talking to this person in the other plane, like we're having a conversation, a reverse shot thing. That probably doesn't happen, right?
I mean, probably not, but it's a movie. They've got to do it. I do love, and I'm sure this does actually happen, that sometimes they're just like, they got all this equipment, and sometimes it's just like the guy in the back seat looking around, being like, the guy's on the left. Like, is that really how you guys figure it out? Like, that's crazy. That's so stressful.
Oh shit, right in front of us. Yeah. Although that's a great moment.
It's a great moment. It's a great, and it's the way he says it too.
It's the end scene.
Yeah, when he says that either he's on our nose or whatever. It's just a great moment, the way he delivers that line. But I think, again, it's something where we've seen the way it's supposed to go a bunch of times. We've seen it go wrong as many times as it can go wrong. So we get to see it go basically right this time, right? Which I think is great. So other than the laser moment, right? But, Rooster gets his moment. He speeds up. We do all the things. they pull out. Every time they do the fucking pull up, I get like,
oh, I love it. Yep.
I get like stressed out. Even though I know they're going to be fine, I get stressed out because again, they've shown you like what can go wrong. So, and that's a believable thing that could go wrong, right? In this moment is one of them pass out and then has to eject and then has to get saved, right? So like that is something that could happen. So I feel those stakes, but they get out and then
and it's also a thing that like maybe isn't the pilot's fault, right?
Exactly.
Like you may just your body might just sort of give out in that moment when you're pulling those sort of G forces, and like you have to. That's the only way. Otherwise, you just crash into the side of the mountain, kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
I love it. Like we see earlier in the film in one of the training sequences, one of the other pilots, like Maverick, has to basically wake him up by targeting
which
him.
is cool.
So his alarm goes. I love that scene so much. And we get this wonderful wide shot where we're seeing the top of the canyon, and then the two planes just kind of rocket out of it, so we know he's okay.
Yeah.
Just another one of those stand up and cheer moments.
Yeah, absolutely. I said that I love they pull out. I love they did like, okay, here come the missiles. Like we gotta. I will say the one part of it, I feel like they go a little too far when it's that one wide shot where there's like, it looks like 1,000 missiles are trying to hit them and they're like dodging and weaving around the missiles after they get out of the canyon. I'm like, all right, like I can do with this seems unsurvivable. Like to me, like what's going on right now. Like the whole reality of the movie, you've been really good about making like, this is really tough, but survivable. This looks unsurvivable to me. And for it is
fifth generation fighters.
I mean, that's not even the fifth generation fighters. Those are the Sams that are coming at him at that point.
No, I know. They're up against this thing.
Yeah.
I love the sound effect, which I guess is probably based on the way it really is when they release the flares, the countermeasures when there's a missile on their tail, and the movie, like I'm sure there's not that many of them. Like they kind of blow their entire wad of those like right away, but like oh, fantastic.
When I was a kid, two things that captured my imagination so much were quicksand and the flares that planes put out to stop missiles from hitting them. I was like,
which we've seen in so many movies. It's understandable.
I was so enamored by the flare thing. I was like, that is like a crazy thing. They shoot out like little fireworks to stop missiles from hitting them. Like it seems so low tech, but it's such a cool thing, you know?
And especially again, the fifth generation fighters, this advanced technology that you're up against. Yeah. That's the same shit that worked in 1986. Yeah. So why does it still work now? You'd think they would have figured out a way around that.
They still have flares. The fucking fifth generation fighters still have flares they shoot out.
Oh, they do, yeah.
You know? I do like that moment. Again, we're skipping around a little bit, but I know where that one, I think it's in the last one where he does like that weird, like the fighter does that weird maneuver where it kind of like just like floats behind them, and they're like, "What the hell is that? What the hell is this going on?" I like that moment, though. I'm like, I've seen Maverick do that like 10 times already. I don't know why that's supposed to be like this amazing thing, but
you just hit the brakes, let them go, and then you're right behind. It's in the first movie,
for God's sakes.
Yep.
Gonna slam on the brakes, let them fly right by or whatever. So that we get this scene, they get the Sam scene, and then that sends Maverick down, right? Maverick gets pushed down. And then, basically. And
then we are in like Hollywood action movie 101.
Yeah. But first we get the scene, I think, where what I do like is that just from a character perspective with John Hamm's character, in that first scene when they're going over the mission, like, Maverick is sort of like, and bring them home, right? And it's sort of like that,
right.
like
and he's totally dismissive of that. It's like, nope, we're gonna complete the mission, and whoever makes it back. And if it's nobody, it's nobody.
Like Padme Anakin meme that went around like last year, where it was like the first shot from Attack of the Clones, which is like, and bring them home, right? And he's just like staring at her. That's what it felt like in this scene. But then at the end, Ham's like, no, we're not losing anybody else. You're coming home. And like that's a change in his character, which I like that about that scene. It's not like,
well, it's Maverick and he still hates him.
Yeah, so. Exactly.
He probably feels less bad about him than he would about anybody else.
He does look conflicted about it.
He does, yeah.
But everyone kind of agrees he's making the right call, right? And then we kind of cut away to Maverick on the ground. The helicopter thing, I'm like, okay, like again, we're adding so much to like this like scenario. The helicopter kind of like tracking him and it's about to shoot him, and Rooster blows it out of the sky, which I like the thought of it, right? And then Rooster gets shot down. And then this part of the sequence I don't really love. I will say I am a sucker. Again, I talked about before. I like bits with two actors doing bits with each other.
Oh, there's a lot of
it becomes like a buddy action comedy.
In the climactic scene of the movie, it's not the right time for that. They like walk into this base,
I love
right?
it,
like
though.
I know
I love it.
There's been an attack on it, so they've kind of disabled most of the planes there and everything. But like, there's a shit ton of people there, and they just kind of like sneak it. It's like very, again, kind of sitcom-y.
This feels the most Mission Impossible, to be honest with you, of most of the scenes.
Oh yeah. Like particularly the tone of Mission Impossible, which is different from Top Gun
absolutely.
Maverick, right? Like Mission Impossible, you are willing to suspend disbelief for stuff like that, and it's more comedic in some ways. And I don't know. I mean, we're supposed to be very, very invested in these two characters here, and I'm just like, oh, we're Abbott and Costelloing.
But the humor makes me more invested in them. That's just who I am as a person. Like the humor makes me more invested in them as people. So
when have we ever seen Rooster like when they sit down in the plane in the F-14? He's like, "This is so old." you're smarter than that, Rooster.
Yeah, but he doesn't say it like that. He's just kind of like, oh, like what am I like? I don't know. Like I've never flown this thing before. You know, like. I do like when he's like, there's like 700 fuses back here, Mav. You gotta be a little more specific. But I like that moment. Again, this is another meta thing a little bit, but when he's like, okay, well, you got it. They have the whole scene, which I do like, where he's like, the whole point of me taking the missile was so you wouldn't die. Now you showed back up here and you're going to die.
The scene in the woods is great. Yeah. Where he's like, are you good? And Rooster's like, yeah. And then he like tackles him and confronts him. That's nice.
Yeah. But I like that. Then Rooster's like, hey, we're get out of here. Like, what's your plan? And then he just gives him like that Tom Cruise look, like, and he's like, oh God, like, what is the plan going to be? And I like that one where they're in this, they're first walking in. They're like, okay, just walk in. Like we're supposed to be here. Like they're not like they're really busy. Like, cause who's going to think that two enemy combatants are just going to stroll onto their bombed out airfield, But I'm always like, okay, we should start running. we should start running. They boot up the plane. Of course, it's a big nostalgia moment, right? You get to see the F-14 or whatever in this moment. And I like that he wrote, again, the process thing, walks through it, hit this button, wait till it gets to here, hit this, pull out all the pins,
disconnect everything,
jump in the thing. Yeah. I'm like, all right, cool. Like, I like this. I like that, like, they get in the air and it's like, oh, the radio's out. What are we supposed to do? Again, we have another Tom Cruise movie. He's like, oh, Mav, this is not a runway. This is a taxiway. And he's like,
fantastic.
Oh, we're taking off.
Like, well, we're using the afterburners on the ground.
Exactly.
Probably doesn't work, but looks really cool.
Yeah. And again, it's the thing. I'm Tom Cruise. Like, I'm going to get this.
Yeah.
I'm going to do
Ethan
this.
Hunt can do this.
Yeah. If anybody can do it, it's me. I'm Tom Cruise. They get in the air, right? And I like that, the thing with fixing like the nav system or whatever. I like that. And I do like, it's unrealistic. Obviously, they've set up these fiction fighters. You can't even beat them in the newer airplanes.
Well, it's the pilot.
It's the pilot.
Plane,
it's not
Bobby.
the plane. It's the pilot. And again,
it's great to see some actual dogfighting in this movie, though. Like,
it had to happen.
It really makes you wait a long time for it, but it gives you a very, very satisfying, wonderful dogfighting sequence here, where it's them versus two of these fifth generation fighters, and they kind of use everything in their arsenal. The flares and the maneuvers and everything. It's really, really like. Again, going back to Kosinski and the way he directs action sequences, we always kind of are very well oriented in these scenes. It is nicely subjectively from the perspective of Rooster and Maverick in the plane. So we're not like seeing the enemy pilots like up close and kind of getting a sense of what they're trying to do. So there's a lot of tension, like where are they? What's their plan? That kind of thing. And it's a very, very satisfying sequence. It probably reminded me the most of the first movie in this moment, where there's a couple good sequences like that there, but like literally everything we've seen up to this point has been, no real weapons, just kind of practice runs kind of thing. And we actually, I don't know. I mean, we had to have it. The way that it's set up, the contrivance of it really sort of wears on me by this point. And the way this sequence ends, it's just, you already had that last minute save. Yeah, exactly.
That's what I mean.
Then we do it again.
I think you take out that last minute save from Rooster in like the
Hangman.
Sorry, no. I'm saying when Rooster saves, what's his name at the last minute?
With the helicopter.
Maverick with the helicopter. I almost called him
where it just explodes out of nowhere. Yeah, no, you're still right.
Yeah, so take that scene out, and then I think the Hangman scene has a lot better impact. But I think like the fight against the two planes, I really, really like. I like that.
Yeah, me too.
That you use everything in their arsenal. Totally fine with that. I like the way, again, it's the scene where Miles Teller is kind of like, I can't believe I'm in this plane doing this stuff right now. You get that vibe for sure from him, and I like all that stuff. I like the first plane goes away very quick, and then the second one takes like a lot of work to
oh man, the impact of the gunfire, the Vulcan cannon from the F-14 into that enemy plane is just, it's glorious.
Yeah, it's great. It's awesome.
That is the money shot in a movie like this.
Yeah, I love that. If the next scene had just been like, oh, he's on our nose, and then he gets blown up by Hangman, I would have been totally fine with that. I would have cheered, have been awesome. I didn't need like the whole like, oh no, we're gonna die. I'm like, you're not gonna die.
Flying up into the stratosphere saying I'm sorry. There's a line of dialogue there too.
Yeah, like it's hard. He goes,
like,
I get it.
Man, I got this one killed too.
Yeah. We know he's not gonna die at that point. There's gonna, come back, and so when he blows up the plane, like I like the moment, but I think if they had just been a little bit more, and I don't even mind the contrivance of them getting on the plane. I don't mind that stuff at all. I like that stuff. I'm just saying if you pared down some of that stuff, I think that ending would have a little bit more impact. I do love one of the things I will always love in movies. It's stupid. It's just, it's corny, but like when they're like, an F-14 just appeared on our radar. Who could it be? And then Ham's just like, Maverick. I'm like, I just love that shit,
Yeah, I do too.
I just love that shit. I don't know. I know it's kind of stupid, but it's probably just my brain being, born on 80s action movies and all those kind of things. But I love when a character's sort of like reputation is so precedes them and so is ingrained that just that one like line that happens, tells you everything you need to know about how that person feels about that person, and how crazy that person drives them. There's to give you an example, there's this really great Spider-Man comic book arc called Superior Spider-Man, where this thing's like 10 years old, so I'm gonna spoil it a little bit. Basically, Dr. Octopus he's dying, and he engineers a way to swap his brain into Peter Parker's body, basically. So he is Spider-Man, like into Spider-Man's brain. So he is Spider-Man, but people think he's Peter Parker for like this whole run of this book, this whole arc of this book. It sounds really silly and comic booky. It's so good because he eventually starts to like be like, he starts to like develop sort of like some sort of moral compass about his life or whatever. But he's fighting the Green Goblin. He's fighting Norman Osborn mostly because he wants to like not have him be competition. But at some point during the time he's fighting him, because Norman doesn't know really that he's Otto necessarily, and then he kind of figures it out. And so then he knows he's Otto, and then at some point their brains get swapped back, and they're in this fight together, and he's fighting the Green Goblin, right? And he makes one of his Spider-Man cracks, and Goblin immediately knows that the brains have been switched back, right? And he just kind of goes like, you, or whatever. And like, it's the same exact thing. And I just love it so much. I love that kind of vibe so much.
It is. It's that 80s action movie thing. This is the rebel cop movie.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's all those things.
Yeah.
It's the sports movies.
Mm-hmm.
It's the loose cannon cop movie.
Yeah.
It's all those things kind of nicely brought back together. And like, we see all of that stuff still, right? Like the Marvel movies, you're just mentioning the comic books, but like a lot of those tropes, a lot of the cliches, the stuff that we found really fun, the wisecracking and all that from the 80s action movies, you do still get.
You do.
That, but you never really get that in these kinds of settings, in these kinds of movies anymore.
Yeah.
But I think this leans a little bit too hard in that direction in this last sequence when I want to just be completely emotionally invested. I don't want to be sort of seeing the screenplay. I don't want to be seeing that heavy hand of writing happening in this movie, and I don't know.
It's not a naturalistic movie though. That's the only reason why it doesn't bother me, because the whole
it's not, but it really, I don't know. It crosses the line of being absurd so many times, but like this is when it really just kind of does all that at once. Like every time it does that before this, it does something that's more believable afterward, so that I don't feel it so much. And this last, like, basically right after Maverick gets shot down in the end of this movie, that's when I really start to see the thread start to show a little bit.
That's funny.
And it's fine because everything else was like, I love this movie. Like I really, particularly after seeing it a second time, I always appreciate it. Like after seeing it the first time, it was a great theatrical experience, as I've said. But like now I'm convinced, particularly the first 30 minutes or so, as I was saying in this movie, like this is great. Like I think it does everything that it needs to do in such a wonderful way most of the way through that I'm willing to forgive it a lot of stuff. Like I do think it's about a 9.5, but here is where I really start to lose it a little bit. And thankfully the movie's over not too long after this. So
not as long, not as quickly as it should be though. There is a little bit of chuff at the end of this movie where I'm like,
that's fair. Yeah.
I think it's the other thing where I think it's just what, the kind of ludicrousness that you sort of like and the ludicrousness you kind of don't like, I think are the things that are competing a little bit here in this moment, you know? But
that's a good way because like this doesn't bother you.
No, it doesn't bother me at all. It doesn't bother me at all.
Okay.
I actually like it. Like I said, I don't like really the scene where Maverick wakes up and then like we get that last minute save and then he immediately gets shot down. I'm like, there's just too much repeated stuff happening right now. You know, if he had just like kind of like shown up, you know, or his plane got shot down and then he had shown up or he had parachuted in or something, I would have been okay with that. Like, you know, Rooster. And then we get to like sort of the buddy cop thing. I would have been good with that because I like the buddy cop part, but I just like that setup. I like Hangman's little moment where he's like, I am very good or whatever. Like it's like a good movie star little moment for him, you know, at the end there. I enjoy that. You know, the thing, again, it feels like Tron Legacy. This whole thing where he picks Jennifer Connelly up in the airplane and they go on this like long flight, which is like a commercial for this airplane. Like it's like the end of Tron Legacy where they're driving the motorcycle through like the woods of California or whatever. And I'm like, I
see, but I liked that. We talked about that when we talked about Tron Legacy. Yeah. I thought that was a nice moment. We end this virtual world. We end on a shot that is totally the organic
yes, but
world,
it's very long.
Surrounded by greenery. I don't mind it. It kind of made me laugh though. So we get this ending scene, you know, they fly off into the sunset, literally fly off into the sunset. This wonderful, I think it's a P-51 or a P-38, this vintage World War II plane.
It's Tom's plane. Tom owns that plane.
It's Tom's plane. It's Maverick's plane. It's in his hangar right next to his like chair where he sits and watches TV, which is ridiculous, but looks amazing. Yeah. But they fly off into the sunset together and then the credits start to roll and then it comes like back into frame like a number of seconds later where we think we're just going to look at this sunset for a while and then we get like that second flyby. Really it's very commercial, it's very Kosinski, but I liked it a lot. Do we need to see him and Rooster working on that plane together? Probably not.
No. I would say something I do like is that Connolly when he comes back from the mission he's like, where's, you know, what's her name? I can't remember. What's her name right now? What's Connolly's character's name?
Penny.
I was gonna call her Patty. Where's Penny? She's like, oh, she's doing a thing. I'm like, it's nice that she's not just like sitting there waiting for him to come back. Like she's not waiting on the runway for him to like land.
No, and I was saying that before, because that would have been landing on way too far.
Like she has another life other than just whatever happens to Pete Maverick Mitchell. You know, I like that about that. And I'll say this, the ending, I love it when they put the people's faces that we just saw in the movie that we like in the end credits.
Oh, me too.
I love it. I love these people.
Although
show me them again, put their names up, give me a chance to like clap my hands for them. I mean, there's, you know, it happens like the end of franchises, right? But it was now, but it's such, I just love it. Like, just give it to me.
I feel a little bad for Jennifer Connelly though, because she's just Penny and everybody else has a cool call sign.
Yeah, I know, but that's that's what you get. That's what happens.
I know, but like, you know, Jennifer Connelly, Penny doesn't have the same impact as like Glenn Powell. Hangman.
Yeah. I agree. But I love it. I like whenever movies do this, cool. I'm totally into it. Like the end of Avengers Endgame when they do like everybody who's ever been in like the fucking franchise. I'm like, yes. I'm like, just show me everyone. Like it's like being in the theater and giving like being able to give people a curtain call. Like I love that stuff. I love that stuff so much.
And you don't see that as much now as you did like back in the day.
And I love like it's just one of the things where like I love movies. I love people who do make movies and are in movies, and I just want to be able to be like, I love this. I love that person in the movie. Yes. And maybe I don't know their name. Maybe I don't know the actor's name, you know, and it's better than seeing like a scroll of like a line, you know, like a wall of text. Like, show me this is Bill Pullman's son.
And this movie has like an opening credit sequence as well, which you don't see those much anymore. And I've always kind of liked those, you know, it kind of gets you in the mood to watch the movie. Like now it's just cold open. We get the title and we're in. And this kind of did the throwback thing that I really like a lot. Let's see who's in it. Let's see who edited and who was the cinematographer. Claudio Miranda, by the way. He was the one who won the Oscar for this, correct?
Did it win cinematography?
I thought it won cinematography. Hold on. I have it here somewhere.
but he is like, he's Kosinski's guy, and I like his stuff a lot.
It went for best sound.
I thought it went cinematography.
No,
too.
there's no way it went cinematography. Well, this was the Everything Everywhere All at Once here.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. It was. I don't think it was it even nominated for best cinematography. It was nominated for best picture, adapted screenplay, original song,
Sorry,
editing, visual effects.
it won a New York Film Critics Circle Award for best cinematography.
Okay,
it's got beautiful cinematography.
it's got beautiful. Yes, it absolutely has beautiful cinematography. But I knew it didn't win. That's one of those awards that it's either the movie that wins best picture or it's something that looks like unbelievable. Like it's something that's like insane looking. That's the kind of thing it usually is. So yeah, that's Top Gun Maverick. This thing grossed a cool $718.7 million at the domestic box office, $1.496 billion at the worldwide box office. Highest grossing film in 2022 for the US and Canada. You said it's like I said, second post-pandemic film to reach 1 billion at the box office. I'm guessing after Spider-Man No Way Home, right? That was the first one, I believe.
I don't know.
Which also made an insane amount of money. Like it's one of those crazy things. Highest grossing film of Tom Cruise's career.
That was kind of a shocking statistic to me. Although thinking back, it's like, okay, he's had a lot of hits, but never.
I bet you if he adjusted some of those things for inflation, it might probably pass. It might equal it, but, it's just, it was a complete like shocker for how much it actually made. It was one of those things that I feel like people didn't really predict, obviously, that it would make that much. And I'm wondering what was the opening weekend gross? It made a lot of money opening weekend. It made 124 million opening weekend. But the thing about it was that a lot of movies make that much and obviously don't make nearly as much as this. Yeah. But
this is a perfect time as Memorial Day release.
Yeah.
Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was the other. We didn't talk about it before, and not important necessarily in the grand scheme of things. But like the release date of this was shifted around so many times. Like all of the stuff in the pre-production and the release of this movie, like you'd think when it comes out, this is going to be a disaster, right? Like it is troubled production. Like so many different drafts of the screenplay, so many different ideas. You end up with they go back and reshoot. Like they spend a year reshooting action scenes or shooting additional action scenes. Then the movie's supposed to come out. Then COVID hits. Then they're talking about releasing it to streaming. Tom Cruise steps in and says, "Don't release it to streaming. This needs to be a big screen movie," which I give him a lot of credit for. As I said, I've never believed him quite as much, even in the scene between Maverick and Iceman here, when he comes on this little disclaimer at the beginning of the movie, like, "Thank you for being here. We really wanted to do this in a theater. We really wanted to bring people back." I love the way he said it, and I love what he had to say, and I really bought it. I don't know, like it's usually when studios are kind of that way with a movie, or usually when there's that much trouble in just getting a movie out to the public, that is a sign of trouble. And in this case, it all paid off, right? Like it showed up exactly when it needed to, and it did exactly what it needed to do.
Yeah. So I'll just say this, the opening weekend, the Memorial Day, like 4-day weekend, it made $160 million, which is great, obviously. But what happens after it is the thing that's really the crazy thing. It makes $90 million the next weekend, which is only 28% off of what it made the weekend before, that's unheard of for big blockbusters like this, right? Then it makes 51 million, 44 million, 29, 25. It goes back up to 32, 15, 12, 10, 8, 7, 7, 5, 4, 6, 7, 3, 2, 1. It's still making over $1 million a weekend into the first weekend of October, which is why it has such an insane box office total. Obviously, just one of those crazy things.
Well, great word of mouth, and I definitely believe it is a terrific big screen movie. Yes. It was playing on the biggest screens for a very long time. Like, I am sorry that I didn't see this twice in the theater when it was on its original run. Like, if they re-release this on the big screen at some point, I will be back to see it.
And yeah, it obviously it catapults once again. I mean, pre-pandemic, Cruise had Fallout, which made $220 million and was this like insanely well-regarded action movie. And then he comes out of the pandemic with this, and it's basically at that point, it's like Tom Cruise has like saved movie theaters and you know whatever.
That was the narrative. Yeah.
Yeah.
How many think pieces were written about Top Gun Maverick?
So
and,
many.
what it meant.
To the point then when Dead Reckoning did worse than people expected, people were like, well, maybe Tom Cruise is done now. You know, like people don't care about Tom Cruise anymore. And I'm like, maybe they released it the week before Oppenheimer and Barbie. Maybe that's why it didn't make any money. Maybe Tom was just a little too stubborn about when Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning was going to come out. Yeah, so it's a crazy hit, obviously. Kosinski, I was watching, it's so funny. I watched so many interviews in the past week with him, and I watched this Directors on Directors interview with him and Ryan Johnson. And there couldn't be two more different people on camera than the two of them, because Ryan Johnson is like born to be interviewed by people. You know, he's so avuncular, and he's funny and he's witty and he's like trying to make jokes all the time. And he's like, and he would try to make jokes with Joseph Kosinski. Just meant to be like, yes, that was very funny. And then would just like talk about something that happened in the movie.
Joseph Kosinski is a consummate professional. Yeah. And I'll be honest, like I having seen his movies, having watched a number of interviews and read a number of interviews with him, like usually my favorite kinds of directors from that scene, like I love the movie nerds, right? Like the talkers, the Tarantino's, the Scorsese's, who are like, I'm going to just rattle off names and a bunch of movies and like, you know, go on like a coke fueled tangent about whatever. And Joseph Kosinski, like I believe, you know, I know there's a lot of that in Hollywood. I feel like he doesn't touch those kinds of drugs, right? He's just a very professional, very well put together, but like in an interesting way, right? Like he doesn't seem like a robot. He's serious. He's
very serious.
Professional in a way that you don't necessarily see a lot in this business. And I kind of like that about him. I've come to really appreciate just sort of his persona. And maybe he's not actually like that, but certainly in interviews, he comes off that way.
There's something like old timey, he would wear a suit on set kind of vibe to him, you know?
Yep, he's not a hoodie guy.
Yeah, not a hoodie guy. He does, and he also, like, I'll say this, listening to him talk about this movie and then what he's doing with the F1 movie, he's got a little bit of that, like, Cameron thing to him where he seems like he's very interested in, like, the technology side of it. Like,
like pushing the envelope.
How can we, what can we do with cameras? How can we sort of like, what new cameras can we develop? What new tools can we develop to shoot these things? You know, because the F1 movie he said they created like a whole new camera system basically for it to make it work, and they have the actors really driving the cars, and that's obviously he took a lot from Top Gun into that into making that movie. So you know we'll see how that works out whenever it comes out. But he did try to make the Gran Turismo movie. He was set to do that in between Only the Brave and Top Gun, the Gran Turismo movie that eventually came out last year, directed by Neil Blomkamp. So obviously this racing thing he's sort of been like circling, for a little while. So he's got his interests, obviously. He likes vehicles. You can definitely tell he likes vehicles. All his movies have a lot of vehicle stuff in them.
Yeah, although I think he gets better and better with people every time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm not saying like
culminating in this movie.
Things like the objects in his movies. He definitely likes vehicles as objects. In his movies. Well, because when he talked to, I watched this feature about him designing that plane, and he was like, oh, when I was in school, I studied to be an engineer a little bit, like to design planes. I was like, of course you did.
Yeah,
of course that's one of the things that you did.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, even like in the other movies, like when he gets to cut loose and stuff like the vehicles in Oblivion is the best thing in the movie.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. It's a big thing for him. But I'd say the thing I was most impressed by with this is how sparingly he used the visual stuff we had seen in a lot of the other movies. There was still the commercial stuff like we talked about, but he seemed to scale that back and bring a little bit more of the parts of Only the Brave that felt a little more naturalistic into a lot of the scenes in this. Obviously, some of that is dictated by the fact that there's only so many ways you can shoot that cockpit, and there's only so many ways you can shoot the aerial stuff. You can't look unless you're until you're the end when you're with like that plane at the end. You can't really shoot them in like a very super controlled way, right? Because
boy, do I love the cockpit close-ups in this movie.
Oh yeah, and
with the reflection in the goggles.
Did you see the camera system stuff they set up for it? Have you seen the pictures of it? It's insane, like what it looks like. It's crazy. And they said also they could they could take the camera parts off because the lenses were detached and like put them in places. Cause there's that one shot that's like from below, which is crazy. I'm like, how did they that can't be a real plane, but it is a real plane. They got the camera down there. there's one shot when they're talking about that last shot where they were like, when Connolly had to take the flight in that other, the end plane or whatever. And she's like, Tom's like, okay, we're going to go up there. We're going to do some easy rolls and some easy flips. And she's like, excuse me. But yeah, all these guys train to fly these planes and stuff like that, which is crazy.
They say Tom Cruise designed the whole training regimen,
yeah,
which sounds like a very Tom Cruise thing. Like you say that about any other actor, like bullshit,
exactly.
Whatever. That's some PR person wrote that. But like with Tom Cruise, like he has the means, he has the power, and he has the insanity to actually do that.
And there's only like we said, there's only two things in the world he cares about. It's Scientology and making movies. So like that's the only two things that he
supposedly he's a very good Scientologist.
Yeah. He's a state and count is low, high.
He takes it as far as he can go. He's the best of the best.
Yeah. It's a great action movie, and it's.
What do you think about the Best Picture nomination?
I think it's a little crazy, but I also think like you have 10 nominations. That's why you have 10 nominations, right? To put movies like this into that pool. I always think the Oscars are like they're no matter what changes about the board or what changes about it always feels like an old man trying to like relate to the kids. It's like if we nominate Top Gun, kids will watch the Oscars. I'm like, that's not true. The Oscars are 3.5 hours long, and even the people on them are like, what a boring show this is. Like nobody under the age, unless they're a huge movie dork, is under the age of 50 or 40 is watching this thing, unless you're a big movie dork, which I've always watched them. I've always loved them. I get annoyed by like the whole, like, this show's so long. I'm like, I want it to be long. I don't care how long it is. It's the one night of the fucking year where they talk about movies for 3.5 hours.
Well, I like when they move things along. I agree with you, but like, if it's going to be 6 hours, I want it to be an entertaining 6 hours.
Well, it's never 6 hours.
You're Hollywood. You can do it.
It's never 6 hours.
It feels like it's something.
There was some plan somebody put put out one time, which I thought was really interesting, where they were like to divide the ceremony up in a way where it's like you do like you air the whole thing, but you basically kind of do like you do like a primetime short, like hour and a half long show that's just the big categories with all the celebrity, with all like the pomp and circumstance, but you do all the other categories televised on air, but you don't like make people who don't want to watch all that stuff have to sit through it. And I think it was like a very interesting like way to plan it out, where you don't denigrate the categories. You don't give away Oscars off screen, which is one of the things I hate that. They were like, in a previous unreleased ceremony, we gave away this Oscar. I'm like, I want to see who won the Oscar. I want to see him give a speech.
Well, we're not the target audience.
I know, but that's the thing.
Never really happened.
But that's the thing, is like they're never going to get their target audience. That's the thing. They have this idea that's going to be like it was in like 1985 when like 100 million people watched the Oscars. There's too much other shit to watch on the TV. No one's going to do that. Just make it the most movie dorkish shit you possibly can, because then movie dorks will want to watch it,
Well, when you're president of the Academy, I will vote for it. When I get a vote, you can run for president, and I like that idea.
And get Jimmy Kimmel out of here. All right, he's fine. He's totally milk toast fine. But it's like we're in this era with like a Super Bowl halftime show after the Janet Jackson thing, where they're like, who are the oldest, safest people we can possibly get to play the halftime show? Like, this is what we're at right now. Like, you get somebody who loves movies and is funny to be the host. John Mulaney,
and it's just a little bit dangerous.
John Mulaney should be the damn host of the Oscars every fucking year. He hosts all these like other award shows, and whenever you see clips of him, like on these, he hosts like the Critic Award shows and like Guild Award shows, and he's hilarious and great. He had that one bit on the Oscars where he talked about like he like referenced like weird shit in his little like bit, and it was really funny. I'm like, that's what I want. Like, I want like a real comedian who's funny, who, like you said, has a little bit of danger to him,
and might say something he'll regret for the rest of his life. Yeah.
But I also think in general,
it's live television.
I also think in general, people are too hard on Oscar hosts. I always thought whenever people are like, this person wasn't funny, I'm like, I thought this person was great. Like, I don't know. Yeah. Like, what do you expect from them? Like, if you go back and watch the old Billy Crystal ones that people remember and think are so amazing, like the openings are great. And then after that, it's just the same bullshit it is now.
Yeah, nobody remembers the jokes from like 2.5 hours into the show.
It's all the same jokes.
Yeah.
Oh, my mom's gonna die before the show's over. It's all the same fucking jokes that have been going on.
Yeah, it gets like real meta toward the end now.
Yeah,
I can't believe we're still here.
Yeah, for forever. It's been the same fucking jokes, you know? And so like, I think people just need to relax. Like I thought Jon Stewart was great the 2 times he hosted. People hated him, you know?
Yeah, he was fine.
You know, I thought he was really good. I thought the Hugh Jackman year was really good. You know, like I like the only year that I thought was really truly bad was the Anne Hathaway, you know.
I was just gonna say, it was James
Franco.
Franco,
and that was mostly Franco's fault because it was like, let's put up this like charismatic theater kid and let's put her next to a charisma vacuum sitting on the screen next to her. Like he was high out of his mind. He didn't do any, like it was so weird. It's a weird decision to do that. But anyway,
well, they've never done it again and probably never will.
No.
Let me ask we're probably wrapping up here.
Yes.
What do you, we definitely do. What do you want to see in the next subsequent Top Gun movie that is definitely coming out at some point?
Well, here's the thing. Here's my hot take is I don't think there's going to be another Tom Cruise Top Gun movie. I really don't. I think he's going to do this last Mission Impossible movie. And he kind of said like, that's the end for him as far as like big, huge action movies go.
Well, I mean, they're going to make another Top Gun. Tom Cruise has to be involved in some way. Probably he won't be there. Like one of the, like Miles Teller keeps saying they're going to make Top Gun Rooster, where we're going to follow Rooster now. And
I want to see the box office drop off on that one.
Well, that's what I mean. I mean, like if Maverick's not involved in some way, I don't think you got a movie there. I don't think it's, you're going straight to Paramount Plus no matter what.
At this point, it's Top Gun Hangman. At this point, if the studio has any way around it,
that's not a bad idea.
I don't think they should. Here's the thing. Like, I get it. They made so much money. Of course, the studio is going to try to do another one. I think like it. I don't. Unlike a Mission Impossible franchise where it's very easy to be like, okay, what's the next like crazy thing that we can do? How do we top ourselves? It's a spy thing can be, really good. It's born out of a TV show. So like there's serialization built into it. I think the Top Gun thing is like, what do? You just do another hard mission, no, it's not going to be as impressive. It's going to be diminishing returns no matter what happens. That's my real feeling about it. So like, I'm sure that they want to make money, they'll do it. And I'm sure if Mission Impossible 8 does poorly, maybe he'll be like, okay, let's bring back Top Gun Maverick. I would much rather than be like, let's do other Tom Cruise Lego sequel ideas, for like popular, but maybe middling 80s action movies or whatever. Where's our Days of Thunder, like a sequel? Joseph Kosinski, perfect for it.
Oh, for sure. But he's making the F1 movie, so he's definitely not doing that.
Yeah, he loves.
I could do more Top Gun. I think this is the perfect. I do think those 2 movies really nicely work as a double feature or something like that. Like Top Gun Maverick is the end of something, right? It's not a continuing thing. Anything going forward has to be something. I don't know. I hate to say it. Probably going to send him in space, and maybe that's where they need.
That's
to
the
go.
Doug Liman movie, man. He's not going to space with anybody else but Doug Liman. So, I just think here's the thing. I think Cruise is very, very savvy about this, right? And I think he knows that Top Gun Maverick was as popular as it was because it was this sort of lightning in a bottle experience. It was the fact that it was a long-awaited sequel to a movie that was extremely popular. It came out after a pandemic when people were really jazzed to go back to movie theaters. And when he was sort of at the peak of his this Renaissance popularity. And it had all the thing where we shot all these plane sequences for real. We did all this stuff. I just don't think he's going to want to repeat himself. Right. So you can't shoot it more real than they shot it this time. You know what I mean? I just feel like I think the main sticking point is going to be Cruise. Right. I think Cruise would be the person who would be like, I'm not doing this unless we come up with some idea that I think is really, really worthwhile doing it. And I think that's going to take time, and he's 62 years old. There's only so long he can physically fly in an airplane going Mach 10 or whatever, not that he's actually going Mach 10 in that thing, but, pulling 10 Gs or whatever, he's getting physically too old, and he knows it. He said it basically finally that he's getting to the end of when he can actually do this stuff. So that's why he's like doing these movies and piling in all of this crazy stuff. All these movies. They released a picture today, a little tidbit, but from the filming of the next Mission Impossible movie, and it's insane. He's like, there's like it's like a biplane that's like basically on its side in midair, and he's hanging off the side of the biplane that's on its side, like on like the wings.
Awesome.
Basically.
Pure awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And I just was like, this is exactly what I want. This is all I want. To see this man risk his life for our entertainment over and over and over again.
And put other people at risk too.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I don't know. Like, it's funny to me because like I would say like I could tell you what I wanted from the next 4 Mission Impossible movies, but I didn't even want there to be a sequel to Top Gun in the first place. So it's really tough for me to think about like what I would want this one to be. What about you?
I don't know. Like I said, I mean, there's so few directions you can go with it. There's just like, I'm not that interested in anyone's story. Hangman certainly maybe better a choice than Rooster. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I do think there's maybe something in that idea. Like, the problem with the drone idea is that because really we are kind of in that era, right? Where warfare is mostly conducted by robots at this. Like, we may, by the time they get around to making this movie, we may be involved in another world war. The world is in a kind of destabilized situation now. And maybe it could address
current
that.
Events would make you feel that way.
So like, there's probably a place for a war movie in the next decade or so. Something that shows the technology that we're using against whoever our enemy.
Yeah, you're getting too real now. That's the thing. That's the magic sauce. I think
that's what I'm saying though. That's the one thing the Top Gun hasn't done yet. So like, maybe that's it. It's
Top Gun, that's not Top Gun. That's the thing. That's the thing. I feel like you get to I think watching. I don't know when this episode's going to actually release, what date it's going to release. Something very crazy happened in the last week.
You could say that, like, it's all perennial. It's evergreen.
Yeah. Exactly. For the last 10 years, it's been something really crazy happened this week, and it really
you
stressed
wouldn't believe
me
the
out.
crazy shit that just happened. And you know what? Next week too.
Yeah, and it really stressed me out, and it gave me some anxiety.
And I think we're getting closer and closer to war, or maybe we are at war now.
Or maybe
I don't know how many weeks
something else happened next week that will completely change all of that, and who knows what the fuck is going to happen, right? But what I'll say is that watching this movie, and I think this is why last time I watched it, different time, I was much harder on the whole like political sort of like agnostic nature of the movie. This time when I was watching it, I was like, oh, this is like a fucking warm blanket. I don't have to think about any reality that's happening in the world right now. I can just watch these crazy ass attractive people do crazy stuff, it looks beautiful. It's got great music. Like this is, I said Lauren Ball, if we didn't mention him at the beginning, great score. I think this is a great score, but it's not quite the Fallout score, but it's great score. I was like, oh, this is great. And I think that's the secret to this, right? Is like, you don't watch it to be like, is this commenting on our current political environment in a really poignant way? You watch it to be like, oh, I got the need for speed. It
is. I would describe both movies as just like a whole bundle of fuck yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Like literally every sequence is just kind of that. Like that's what you walk away from every moment of this movie is that's the thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's why I think you have to be very specific about what another Top Gun movie would be. To me, it's like I more want to see what let's do Tom Cruise in X vehicle thing next or whatever, whatever the next crazy real thing he can do, whether it's Top Gun or some new thing. That's kind of what I want to see. Right. My hope for Cruise, now that he's kind of saying he's wrapping up Mission Impossible, is that he's going to sort of, kind of pick up this sort of like, morph into this more like elder statesman sort of role in
like a late period Robert Redford kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, not quite that elder, because he looks, he does look like, he doesn't look like a wrinkled suitcase like Redford looked by the end.
Old Man and the Gun's really good,
but more just like, I think he's going to start hoping working with more interesting directors a little bit. Like, I think he's born to be in a Christopher Nolan movie. I think like that. I think that those two together with both of their like insane sensibilities about like practical effects,
sort of coldness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see
Like,
that. I feel like those guys get along.
I think Nolan could use him really, really well. You know, I want to see him do something like that. There was that rumor before the Tarantino shut down that movie he was doing that he was going to be in The Critic or The Movie Critic or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's kind of stuff I want to see him do.
movie.
You know, I want to see him start working. I want to see him start doing the thing where he takes his persona and sort of flips it around. You know, that Collateral-esque, you know, type of thing in a lot of ways.
Gonna be weird to see him playing somebody's grandpa.
Yeah, I think he's
gonna
barely
happen at
playing
some
anybody's father in a movie. I think we get to father first
Yeah,
before we get to
right.
grandpa.
Well, War of the Worlds.
Yeah, that's true. But very young children.
Yeah.
That was definitely the era still where he's like, I'm 30. You know, that was still that era, even though he was like 45. He was like, I'm 30. You know, like that was still that era with him. So I'm like, oh, I have an adult child who, I mean, they kind of played a little bit in this, right, with Goose. Like, you know, like obviously, you know, but you know, I let's see what he does. One thing I will say about Cruise too, a lot of actors who are short are unwilling to look short on screen. They'll stand on.
There's a moment of this with him and Miles Teller. I didn't realize Miles Teller was that tall.
Yeah.
Again, I think I've said it on the show before. I am like the exact same height as Tom Cruise, so I'm like, go get some, Tom Cruise. You're doing it for all of us.
Like, you know, somebody like Robert Downey Jr. is also famously very short. He's basically the same size as Tom Cruise, but whenever he's in a scene with anybody, he's like standing on a box, right?
Yep.
He's like, yes, I am the same height as Chris Evans and Chris Hemsworth. You know, like that's when it's obviously not true. Cruise is like, no, I'm 5'3" or whatever the fuck size Tom Cruise is.
Yeah. 5'5" and 3/4.
5'5". Miles Teller is probably, you know, 5'11". You know, I don't think he's like 6'3", you know?
Yeah, he's not huge.
But he sat next to him and he's like, Tom Cruise looks really short next to him.
Yeah.
And like, it's like nice that he just lets himself be that way. You know, he's always been that way too. He's never been scared to like, be like, no, this is the size I am, you know? So I appreciate that about the performance. Anyway, this is a great movie. Kosinski's best movie by far, his best movie.
I've been saying it since the beginning too. Like the Kosinski story has this redemptive arc, right? Like
but there's another part.
Stumbles a little bit along the way. No, I know, but we'll see. I'm very interested. Like Spiderhead was the one of all of his. I'd seen Top Gun.
Yeah.
I was interested in the other three that I hadn't seen, but because of what it is and because it's such a departure from anything he's done thus far, at least as far as I can tell, I'm fascinated to see what he does with something like that.
Me too.
George Saunders' story from this very blockbustery filmmaker should be pretty interesting.
Fascinating.
Probably not good, but yeah, I can't wait to see it.
Our third straight Teller, Miles Teller's in it. It's Miles Teller and Chris Hemsworth. And I think Chris Hemsworth will probably never do a movie that involves some sort of computer-esque thing ever again in his life now.
Right, because people are confused with the Black Hat.
Black Hat, which made like $7 million worldwide, and then this movie, which nobody talked about and people seem to not like. But I'm interested to watch it for sure. I wanted to watch it when it was coming out, and then it got such like weird reviews that I was like, I'm not gonna run to watch it.
I was the same way. Yeah.
We'll talk about Hemsworth next week. I'm a Hemsworth mark, so I'm interested to see how I feel about him in this movie.
Okay. I'm pretty indifferent to him, except for Bad Times, the El Royale, whatever that movie was.
We'll talk about his career next week when we talk about this movie. I don't know how much more I'll say about Teller, but we'll see how the movie looks and how it feels, and then we'll wrap up our miniseries on Joseph Kosinski and announce our next director next week. Until then, Nick, thank you so much for doing this. It's about an hour longer, this show, than the film Top Gun Maverick. But I'm happy to be on this journey talking movies late into the night with you, my friend.
Yes, good times, absolutely.
And thank you to everybody who's listening. Until next time, be good to one another.